This is such a great room in the state capitol. One of my favorites. Just come in here and kind of just feel at peace. This is hard on me. Thank you. We're actually waiting on the governor. Can I say that? That's appropriate, right? I can tell you a story. I grew up in Springfield, Illinois, Abraham Lincoln's hometown. And as a little kid, I didn't realize just how absorbed I was in the Lincoln. I was going to his home, going to the old state capitol, the state capitol, and just you feel Lincoln is still alive in a way when you're in Springfield, Illinois. And I always felt very fortunate to have that connection and to see the connection here. It's just something that we're lucky to have had somebody like Abraham Lincoln in our history. I don't have any good jokes. Well, Andy, you have one? Anthony, you're a joker. You have a joke? I could do stolat in Polish for you. Dzień dobry. Dzisiaj jest piękna pogoda. Tak, beautiful weather today. Jestem Terenciusz. Jestem Amerykaninem. I'm Terry. I'm from the United States. I'm an American. Ashley, you want to speak some Russian or some there's the governor. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Governor. You saved a great amount of embarrassment up here. Appreciate you very much. So we're going to start. Thank you. My name is Terry Ryan, and I'm CEO of Bloom, and I have the honor and the privilege to kind of just keep things rolling along as the MC. We're going to start our day. Well, first, thank you, Greg. This will be streamed live, and it's going to be archived, so I want you to know that. And with that, we're going to start out. We're going to have Technical Sergeant Christopher Kunow. I screwed it up. Kunaus. He's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So, Chris, if you'd come up here, and we appreciate you. You can come right here, I think, right? With the microphone and just.
Appreciate it. Flag's on our right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Chris. And then we're going to have two Idaho students are going to lead us in the national anthem, and it's Leah and Corey Kane, and they are from St. Ignatius and Eagle. So over to you, young ladies.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose love stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the rampart we walked, were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you. So now I'm going to ask the Governor Little to come up. Governor Little is a true champion of efforts to improve literacy across our state, especially early years literacy. In his time as governor, funding for literacy has increased fivefold. We're delighted he has taken the time out of his busy schedule to be with us this morning. And thank you, Mr. Governor. Please, we'd love to have you. Appreciate you.
Oh, you're welcome, Terry. Well, good morning. I'm a little late. I was reading this morning. As Terry said, this is something that it's really not rocket science. You want people to learn, they ought to be able to read. So Greg and I were talking that since the dawn of mankind and intelligent civilization, reading's been part of what we do. But these kids are, and I'm really preaching to the choir here, things are more challenging now. I think about when I was in school, when our kids were in school, and now that our grandkids in school, things are more challenging. So it is altogether fitting that we continue to modernize and update how we do reading literacy. As Terry said, it's probably been my number one priority. I often tell my fellow policymakers that if we're going to spend half our state budget on education, it'd probably be good if they knew how to read. And matter of fact, even my friends in the STEM education people that come into my office and pound their fists and say they need to do more in STEM. And I said, well, isn't it kind of important that they read too? And they go, oh yeah, it is. So good for you. And of course, my goal is not just reading, it's all kids reading. Because the kids that really, that we want to help up are the ones that fall through that safety net. And so what we do collectively as a society to help them is how we'll be gauged. I just was reading a report, and I got some more granular data from the Department of Labor yesterday about childhood poverty in Idaho. And I've told two people this since then, that our childhood poverty rate in Idaho is one of the lowest states in the nation, and you don't hear that very often. But obviously, a lot of kids have jobs, or a lot of parents have jobs, so the poverty isn't the issue. But for those kids to continue to go on, literacy is going to be foundational to what we do. You know, when I started, I think we had maybe 7 million in literacy, Greg? I think it's what it was. Then it went to 13. Then it went to 26, and now it's at 73 million. And in school districts, and I'm an advocate for this, use those literacy dollars in a variety of ways, because our goal is to move the needle, and of course the needle, and it's not perfect, but at least we have one, is the IRI scores. When we had IRI, even I think pre-Dr. Howard, and then we kind of changed IRI, and now we're going back to IRI. But my issue with all of everything we do in testing is you build a baseline at with a certain bunch of facts and data, and then if you change the baseline, then you've got all these adjustments. I know it's not perfect, but it is what we have, and you know, the department and state board can continue, and they should continue to tweak it to make it more easily accessible, so the classroom teachers can get that data back as soon as possible, and make those necessary changes. Our spring 23. And I know, again, I'm preaching the choir, IRI scores are 75% proficient for third graders, and it was 72%, and in 2021 it was 70%. That's progress, particularly given the fact that those third graders were first graders during COVID. So you need to factor that in to everything we do with these kids right now. I remember when I was up to my eyeballs in COVID, and my education friends, I said, I don't want these kids to have an asterisk on their credentials that say, yeah, but they were in school during COVID. And so what we do, the hard work to get these kids that are behind caught back up is incredibly important to the state and to society going forward. I know some schools that are having, in some states that are still way behind relative to Idaho, and we should be proud of what the hard work that teachers, classroom teachers, and did to help these kids go through COVID. But we've still got work to do, and I'm grateful for Superintendent Critchfield and the department for what they're doing, whether it's facilitating review of the standards and curriculum, whether it's providing research and professional help, whether it's tapping into funds, state funds or federal funds for intervention. And so I'm excited about you being here and for what you do, but you really are doing the Lord's work. Getting all children reading proficiently at the end of the third grade is still my most comprehensive goal for my administration. Anything we can do to help and help Debbie, I'm all in. So thank you for what you do, and enjoy your conference and learn a lot. Thank you.
So thank you. So I'm going to ask Emily to come up, and she's going to give her presentation. And you want me to introduce you, or you want to introduce yourself? How do you prefer it?
Oh, you can introduce me.
Okay. So we had dinner last night. Emily's an amazing person who this is very funny because we have this connection to Poland. We were both in Poland at the same time in the early 90s, which is funny. But Emily Hanford has been working in public media for more than 2 decades as a reporter, producer, editor, news director, and program host. Her work has won numerous honors, including a DuPont Columbia University Award and a Casey Medal. In 2017, she won the Excellence in Media Reporting on Education and Research Award from the American Educational Research Association. Her groundbreaking podcast episode, Hard Works, on why children aren't being taught to read, was a winner of the inaugural Public Service Award from EWA in 2019. Emily is a member of the EWA Journalist Advisory Board and a longtime mentor for EWA's New to the Beat program. And we're very lucky and privileged to have you here with us, and we appreciate you. So over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for inviting me to Idaho. I came from Washington, D.C., which is where I live at the moment. Actually, I've lived there for quite a long time, but I'm not from there. But I live in a neighborhood full of people who are from there. They're really like people who've lived in D.C. in my neighborhood for 35 years. Anyway, good morning. Thank you for that nice introduction. I am here today to tell you about some of the things that I have learned about how kids learn to read. And I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about myself. First of all, I guess to state the obvious, I am not a teacher, and I never have been, except kind of, sort of, I was in Poland. That's why I was there in the early 90s, trying to teach people English. And that was actually a very interesting experience in terms of my thoughts about teaching and how difficult it is when you're not prepared to do it. I am not an education researcher. And I'm not the parent of a struggling reader, and sometimes that surprises people. I'm a reporter, and I have been for my entire career for about 30 years at this point. And I've been reporting on education full-time since 2008 for American Public Media. And I've learned a whole lot in those years. But one of the things that I think is really important to state at the beginning is I do not think that there is a profession that is more important to the future of our society, to all of us, than teaching. So to anyone in this room who's a teacher and educator, thank you. I've also learned in my years and many times being in classrooms that teaching is a really, really, really hard job. We ask a lot of our teachers. I am not here today, excuse me, I had a cold last week. I'm not here today to criticize teachers or other educators. I am here today to tell you what I have learned about how kids learn to read and about the science of reading, which I knew nothing about a few years ago. But over the past 6 years or so, I have had the opportunity to read thousands of pages of books and articles and reports, and I've talked to hundreds of people, and I've visited 10 states and been in classrooms to try to understand how reading was being taught in schools in America today. And what I've learned is basically this. Over the last 50 years or so, cognitive scientists and psychologists and linguists and neuroscientists and other researchers all over the world in labs and in classrooms in English and in other languages have been trying to understand how reading works. How do we read? How do we learn to read? What do kids need to learn to become good readers? And what is going on when kids struggle to learn how to read? And they have learned so much. But this mountain of scientific evidence about reading was not making its way into many classrooms. Teachers and other educators were not, for the most part, being taught this science in their teacher preparation programs. They weren't being taught this science in the professional development they got on the job. And in fact, some of what they learned about reading and how to teach it turns out to actually be at odds with what the scientific evidence says. But as I said, I didn't know any of this a few years ago. I never really thought very much about how people learn to read. I thought it just kind of happens as long as you have enough exposure to books. I don't remember very much about learning how to read. I think it came pretty easily to me. So this is me. It's my first grade school picture. It was 1976. I could have shown you me in my bicentennial uniform, red, white, and blue, baton twirling, but I didn't do that. This is my first grade school picture. And like I said, reading came pretty easily to me. And it came pretty easily to my kids. So I have two boys. These are my boys. They're New England sports fans. This was their first day of school when the little one was starting kindergarten and the big one was starting third grade. And it was a long time ago because these guys are now 23 and 20. When my kids went off to school, I didn't really think about how they were going to be taught to read. I certainly didn't think about whether they were going to be taught to read. I assumed that they would. And like I said, they did learn to read without too much trouble. In fact, my younger son, this is him, just a few months after he started kindergarten, and he's reading a chapter book, Magic Tree House, and I have no idea how he learned to do that. It just kind of seemed to happen. It was sort of like magic. And school was a really good experience for this kid, and it was a good experience for my older son too, and it was for me. I loved school. And I think it had something to do with the fact that reading came easily to us. But here's the thing. Reading doesn't come easily to a lot of people. Far more people than I realized, and it doesn't have to do with intelligence. There are lots of really smart people who struggle to learn how to read. They can learn to read, but they need someone to teach them how to do it. So there was a moment when I started to understand this in a way that I never had before. It was the winter of 2016, and I was interviewing college students who had been placed in remedial or developmental reading classes. And these were students who had graduated from high school, went on to college, and then they were told, wait a minute, you are not quite ready for this. You are not ready for college. And an instructor in one of these classes told me about a student that she had had years earlier. The student's name was Sarah. The instructor said she could tell right away that Sarah was really bright and driven. She wanted a college degree because she wanted to be a nurse. She knew why she was there. She had a goal. But Sarah was really at risk of not being able to pass the assessment that was going to get her out of this remedial English class. Because Sarah really couldn't read very well, and she really couldn't spell. She couldn't write. The instructor ended up petitioning the English department, and she said, look, Sarah's really bright, she's driven, she needs a college degree so she can be a nurse. Can we come up with some sort of alternative way of assessing her so she can move on and pass this class and give her a chance at a college degree? And it worked. Sarah passed the class, and the instructor, whose name is Jill, she lost track of Sarah after that, and she thought about her sometimes and wondered what had happened to her. And then years later, Jill was in the hospital having surgery, and she woke up, and there was Sarah. Sarah was Jill's nurse. So when I heard this story, I thought, well, I really want to talk to Sarah. And being a reporter is the greatest job because you can do things like that. You can just write to someone out of the blue and be like, can we do an interview? And so Jill dug up this old email address, and I wrote to Sarah, and Sarah wrote back to me. And in the winter of 2016, I drove to her house in Connecticut in the middle of this crazy ice storm, and we did a long interview, and she told me about her reading problems. Now, Sarah had just had a little baby a few weeks earlier. This is her and her newborn baby. And this was a lovely little newborn who mostly slept while Sarah and I talked for hours. And Sarah told me her story about never learning how to read. Now, it turns out that Sarah has dyslexia. This is not something that was ever identified when she was in school. It was never officially diagnosed. It's basically what Sarah figured out about herself. And Sarah told me about the strategies that she had to try to get through written text. So there were a certain number of words that she had just memorized, common words that she saw all the time. She just sort of memorized what they look like. And all the other words she would guess. She would look at the first letter and think about something that made sense. The problem was she couldn't come up with a very good guess a lot of the time, so she skipped a lot of words. And this way of reading was really time-consuming and hard and confusing, and she really couldn't focus on the meaning of what she was reading. So her main strategy was to avoid reading. She just didn't do it. She had an older sister who would read stuff out loud to her, and that's basically how she got through school. She graduated from high school, then she got stuck in that remedial class. She got saved by her instructor. She eked her way through college with that goal of being a nurse, but she says she never opened a book. I was like, never? And she says never. She says she never opened a book. Her strategy was to pay really close attention to the lecture and class discussion. She says she has a really good memory, and I believe her. And that's how she got her nursing degree. And she has basically at this point memorized all of the words that she needs to be able to read and write to communicate with the other nurses and the doctors and the medical staff. But she never really learned how to read. Her story was really amazing to me, and I had tons of questions after talking to her about dyslexia, which I didn't really know anything about, and about why Sarah was never identified with dyslexia, why she didn't get any help in school. So this led to my next reporting project in 2017. It's an audio documentary and an article called Hard to Read. So this is about why many students with dyslexia have a really hard time getting the help they need in school. As I said, I knew virtually nothing about dyslexia, but here's what started to happen. I started hearing the same story from parents all over the country, like the same story, same places in the story where the parents would break down and cry, and they almost always did. Here's how the story goes. Our child started school, and we knew something wasn't quite right. We went to the kindergarten teacher, and the teacher said, don't worry, make sure you read lots and lots of books to him, everything's gonna be fine. But reading was really hard for him, he just didn't seem to get it. We went to the first grade teacher, and she said, don't worry, all kids learn differently, he's gonna catch up. But he didn't seem to be making a lot of progress. By second grade, he was avoiding reading. He was telling us he didn't want to go to school. And the teacher said, we just haven't found your child the right book yet. It'll all come together in time. And here's what eventually happens if a family has time and money, especially money. The family pays for private testing. This private testing usually costs thousands of dollars. That is money that Sarah's family didn't have. The family might pay for tutoring. That can easily be more thousands and thousands of dollars. That's more money that Sarah's family didn't have. And the parents of the struggling reader might actually hire an attorney or an educational consultant, or sometimes both, to help them fight for what their child needs in school. And all of this is not just expensive, it's exhausting and frustrating, and it's really, really, really hard. And the parents begin to realize that their child may never get what he needs in school. Or, and this is really important, he's not going to get it fast enough. Because now he's 8 or 9 or 10 years old, and wow, he hates school. And he's falling behind in other subjects because he can't read very well. And maybe he's begun to act out in school, or maybe this is manifesting more as being really quiet. Maybe this is depression, anxiety, withdrawal. This is when, if they have the resources, the family pulls their child out of public school. Many families homeschool their kids, or maybe they come up with the tens of thousands of dollars that it can cost to send the child to a specialized private school If there's a good private school nearby that has space. That's a big if in lots of parts of this country. I'm sure here in Idaho that's the case. So what I started to realize is that this is the situation that we're in, or at least we were in this country. If you can come up with the money to pay for it, you can probably find a way for your struggling reader to be taught how to read. But if you don't have the money and your child is not learning to read in school, what do? The implications of this are really stunning. If you're from a low-income family or even just a middle-income, moderate-income family, there's really no safety net. There's no backup if your child isn't being taught to read in school. As one mom in Maryland put it, where I live, she said, getting help for a struggling reader is a rich man's game. So reading, this is a most basic and fundamental life skill and a foundation upon which academic learning gets built. That's a rich man's game. So how did that happen? How is it allowed to continue? This led me to the next reporting project called Hard Words, which was mentioned earlier. So Hard Words is an audio documentary and an article and a podcast episode, and it's about core classroom reading instruction. So not what needs to be done for struggling readers in particular, but rather what do all of us need to learn to become good readers? Because the bottom line from all those decades of scientific research on reading that I mentioned earlier is that what kids with dyslexia need to learn to become good readers is not substantially different from what all kids need to learn to become good readers. Kids who have dyslexia will need a more intense dose of a certain kind of instruction, but all kids can benefit from the kind of instruction that kids with dyslexia desperately need. So Hard Words focused quite a bit on phonics instruction. And it focused on phonics instruction for two big reasons. One, phonics has been the focus of so much debate and controversy for years, for decades, actually for centuries. You can find fights about phonics going right back to the beginning of public education in this country. When people are fighting about reading, they are usually fighting about phonics. It's like the lighter fluid in the wars about reading, right? The other reason that I focused on phonics is because what scientists have discovered is that phonics skills are critical when it comes to becoming a good reader. Why is that? Because a starting point for reading is sound. So what a child has to figure out to become a skilled reader is that the words that she hears and knows how to say are made up of speech sounds. Those are called phonemes. And she has to understand that in an alphabetic language like English, phonemes are represented by various letters and combinations of letters. Now, this is something that human beings have to be taught. Reading skill does not develop naturally in response to being read to. Learning to read is not like learning to speak. So if you immerse a child in an environment of spoken language, unless she has a hearing problem or a severe developmental issue, she will learn to speak her native language. Not so with reading. Immersing children in a literate environment is really important, but it's not enough. We aren't born with brains that are wired to read. And that is because human beings invented written language just a few thousand years ago, which is really recently in the scope of human history. So children need to be taught how their written language works. Some children need very little instruction, like me and my kids. But some children need a lot of instruction. And again, it doesn't have to do with intelligence. There are lots of very smart kids who have a hard time learning how to read. So this is a slide that some of you may have seen. It compiles estimates from a number of studies. It's made by a woman in Canada named Nancy Young, and you can Google her and go to her website and find the citations on her website of the studies she's talking about. This slide shows that roughly 40% or so of kids are going to learn to read pretty well, no matter how you teach them. A little bit of phonics instruction and immersion in a literate environment is probably going to do the job. But more than half of kids, maybe about 60% or so, are not going to learn to read very well unless they're explicitly taught. And like I said, some kids are going to need a lot of explicit instruction. So I think a really key thing for everyone to understand is that all kids can benefit from explicit instruction. Even those kids who may not need it can become better readers and especially better spellers if they are taught how to read and spell. So no one is arguing that phonics instruction is all children need to become good readers. It is not. There is so much more to teaching a child how to read than teaching phonics. Now, to understand why, it's really helpful to know how kids learn to read. And I think this has been the missing piece for a long time. A lot of people, teachers and the public, didn't really understand how kids learn to read. And it's because we didn't really know. But over the past 50 years, we've really figured it out. Not me, not you, cognitive scientists. So to understand how children learn to read, I think a really good place to begin is with something called the simple view of reading. Some of you may be familiar with this. The first thing to say about the simple view of reading is it does not say that reading is simple. To the contrary, reading is very complex. The simple view of reading is a simple model to understand a complex process. It was first proposed in 1986 when I was in high school by two researchers, Philip Goff and William Tunmer. And they proposed this model because they were trying to clarify the role of decoding in reading comprehension. Because everyone agrees that the goal of reading is to comprehend text. Everyone agrees on that. The question is, how does a little kid get there? So the simple view says that reading comprehension is the product, not the sum of two things. One is your ability to decode the words. So you see the letter string R-E-A-D-I-N-G, and you know that that string of letter represents the word reading. Now, the other part of the equation is your language comprehension. So that is your ability to understand spoken language. We are not talking about your ability to read text. Language comprehension is your ability to understand meaning when someone is talking or when text is being read out loud to you. So, for example, when someone says to you, she is reading the book, you know what the verb means in that sentence. You know what she's doing. The simple view says that if you have really good language comprehension skills but zero decoding skills, your reading comprehension will be zero, because 0 times anything is 0. But the simple view also says that if you have really good decoding skills but very poor language comprehension skills, you just don't know the meaning of that many words in spoken language, your reading comprehension will not be very good either. So let's look at how this applies to learning how to read. Most kids, when they enter school, have very little when it comes to the decoding part of that equation. They have 0 or close to 0 when it comes to the D in the simple view of reading. But they do have something when it comes to the language comprehension part of the equation. Now, there is often a difference between the language a child speaks at home and the language a child is learning to read in school. This will have an impact on learning to read in English. But the simple view of reading equation holds true across languages. So I'm going to take you through the rest of this example, assuming that we are talking about a child who speaks English at home and is being taught to read English in school. So the child comes into school knowing the meaning of a lot of words in English. What this child doesn't know how to do yet is read the words they know how to say. So this is why people familiar with the science of reading call for an emphasis on phonics instruction in the early grades. Because if the goal is to get to reading comprehension and you have a bunch of 5- and 6-year-olds who have language comprehension skills but virtually no decoding skills, what do you need to do to help those children get to reading comprehension? You need to help those children develop decoding skills. So what you want to focus on with little kids is getting their decoding skills up to their level of language comprehension. Now, the simple view shows that focusing only on decoding would be a gigantic mistake because it's only part of the equation. And as everyone knows, even kids who speak English at home come into school with very different language comprehension skills. Some kids know the meaning of lots and lots and lots of words. There are very precocious little 5-year-olds out there. And some kids have far smaller vocabularies. So reading instruction that aligns with the simple view of reading has to focus on the language comprehension part of the equation too. So this means lessons and activities that expand children's oral vocabularies. So I was in a first grade classroom in California where reading instruction was deliberately aligned with the simple view. And what I saw in this classroom was explicit phonics instruction in one part of the reading instruction. And the kids were broken into small groups depending on the level of their decoding skills. And another part of the reading instruction was explicit vocabulary lessons and a lot of reading out loud by the teacher. And the words that the kids had learned were posted on cards all over the classroom, and they included words like gigantic, extraordinary, neighborly, and ridiculous. Think about those words and the spelling of those words. Those are not words that the vast majority of first graders are going to be able to decode, and they shouldn't be expected to. But the kids in this class were learning the pronunciation and meaning of those words. They were using those words in conversation so that when they're able to decode them, they'll know what the words mean. By the way, every single child in this classroom in California, according to the teacher, spoke English as a second language at home, and some of these kids were speaking English as a third language. So as I said, the simple view was proposed as a theoretical model back in 1986, and the basics of this theoretical model have been confirmed over and over and over again by research. And I think the simple view is really helpful because it disentangles some of the stuff that has always been so contentious in the debates about reading. In what's known as the whole language view, and in the balanced literacy view more recently, the focus right from the start of reading instruction should be on getting kids to focus on the meaning of what they're reading. Whole language and balanced literacy are meaning emphasis approaches to reading instruction, as opposed to what's known as a code emphasis approach, which emphasizes the decoding skills at the beginning of reading instruction. So early reading instruction that aligns with the science of reading is a code emphasis approach so that kids can get to meaning. Everyone agrees that meaning is the goal. The question is, how does a little kid get there? So this is another model for understanding how skilled reading works, and there are actually a few others that are really, really interesting. This one is known as Scarborough's rope. Some of you may be familiar with this one. Hollis Scarborough is a person. She's a psychologist who worked for a really long time at Haskins Labs and has been studying reading development since the 1980s. Scarborough's rope helps unpack what goes into each side of the equation put forth in the simple view. So you can see that the upper strand is language comprehension. So this model shows that language comprehension is complex. It's not just all the words you know the meaning of in oral language. It's also your level of knowledge. It's the stuff you know. And it is your understanding of how language works, language structure and grammar, your ability to make inferences and understand things like metaphors and similes. So this is a more nuanced explanation of what goes into the language comprehension part of the simple view equation. And I think it can help teachers and parents understand what might be going on when kids are decoding pretty well, but they're still struggling with reading comprehension. Very often, they have a language comprehension issue. So the lower strand of Scarborough's rope is the word recognition strand. Like the simple view of reading, Scarborough's rope shows that without good word recognition skills, you are not going to become a skilled reader. And the rope unpacks the various skills and abilities that go into word recognition. So you can see that just one element is decoding. That's basically your phonics knowledge. Do you have a good understanding of how letters and combinations of letters represent the sounds in the words? So teaching students the basic letter-sound combinations in the English language gives them access to successfully sounding out more than 80% of the words in English print. But that's not all. Children need more than just phonics knowledge to be successful with written English. That's why I think it's more useful to think about teaching children how their written language works. English spelling is not just based on the sounds and words. English is what's known as a morphophonemic language, meaning our spelling patterns are based on both sounds and meaning. So if you really want to understand English spelling, morphology is really helpful. You need to understand the meaningful parts of words and how English words are put together. And understanding some etymology is really useful and fascinating too. That is, to understand English spelling, it really helps to know something about the history of our language. So English has a reputation for being a wacky language full of all kinds of exceptions, but actually it's not. It's a melting pot language that has complex spelling patterns because English has roots in all these other languages, like Anglo-Saxon and Greek and Latin and French and Native American languages. Written English is perhaps the most difficult alphabetic language to learn. It takes about 3 years for a typically developing reader to master the basics of written English. In contrast, it takes only a few months for most kids in Italy to learn how to decode Italian, because Italian spelling is almost perfectly regular. Italian is spelled the way it sounds. So is Spanish, so is Finnish. I think one of the reasons we've fought so much about reading instruction in the English-speaking world is that there is a lot to teaching children written English. There's a lot for teachers to know. So there's a lot to argue about in terms of how to teach it. So back to Scarborough's rope and the elements of the word recognition strand. So there's phonological awareness, understanding the sounds in words. There's decoding, understanding how letters represent those sounds. And then there's something called sight recognition, which is where I think things get really interesting. Once you are a skilled reader, you don't actually have to decode most of the words you encounter. When you see a word that's familiar to you, you know that word immediately on sight. You don't have to consciously sound it out. Scientists refer to the words that are instantly recognizable to you as sight words. And that term, sight words, is really confusing because teachers and scientists who study reading usually mean different things when they use that term. So in schools, sight words are typically words kids are supposed to just memorize. They may be words with unusual spellings that are difficult to decode, or they may be words that kids are going to come across a lot in their reading, in other words, high-frequency words. And the problem with English is those are often the same. The simplest, most common words are often the ones that are hardest to decode. So children often come home with these words on flashcards, and they're supposed to just memorize them. But what the scientific research shows is that having kids just memorize lots of words is not the best path to good word recognition skills. And it turns out that weak word recognition skills are the most common and most debilitating source of reading problems. Struggling readers may also have language comprehension issues, but when children do not get off to a good start with decoding, it can have an impact on the continued development of their language comprehension. And eventually, kids may be weak on the language comprehension side because they're weak on the decoding side. This problem has been described as the Matthew effect, which is a biblical reference. Basically, when it comes to reading, the rich get richer in so many ways, and it happens fast. Here's how it works. If you come into school with lots of language comprehension, but you struggle with learning how to decode the words, your ability to continue to develop language comprehension may be impeded because one of the best ways to increase your knowledge and your vocabulary and your reasoning and your understanding of the structure of language is through reading. In contrast, if you come into school weak on the language comprehension side, but you are taught how to decode, you have just been given the gift that is your best bet for gaining knowledge and vocabulary because you can read the words. This is why equity in education begins with good phonics instruction in the early grades. It does not end there, but it is one of the most important things teachers can do to try to even the playing field between kids who come from homes that give them an edge on the language comprehension side and kids who come from homes that may not be as rich and resourced when it comes to vocabulary development and access to academic knowledge. Good phonics instruction is where educational equity begins. Again, it doesn't end there, but it's a foundation. Now, the good news is that most schools seem to be doing some kind of phonics instruction these days, right? Publishers and authors of curriculum materials know that if their stuff is going to have a chance of being considered research-based, there has to be some phonics. So one could conclude from that that means we're on the right path, right? Check, check, check. Reading instruction is finally starting to line up with the scientific research. Well, what I started to realize is, wait a minute, not necessarily. Because while more and more schools have been adding a 20 or 30-minute phonics blocks, what I also was seeing all the time are things like this. So these are word reading strategies, and you can find them in schools all over the country. I've seen them everywhere. They're on posters in classrooms. They're on little bookmarks that get sent home with kids. They're all over Google and Pinterest and Teachers Pay Teachers. I've also seen things like this. This came home with a kid in a backpack in Massachusetts. These are strategies for kids to use when they're reading and they come to a word they don't know. And these strategies seem sensible enough. This is really important. This seems to make sense. You get to a word you don't know, what can you do? You can look at the pictures to try to figure out what the word would be. You don't want to completely guess, so you can look at the first letter. Looking at some of the letters will narrow your choices, help you come up with a good guess. You can then check to see if you're right. You can reread the sentence using the word, see if the sentence makes sense. And if you're stuck, you can just skip the words and move on, and hopefully you can get the gist of the sentence anyway. So what's up with this? What is the idea about how reading works that these strategies are based on? What's the idea about how kids learn to read? That's what I started to get really curious about. That's what I wanted to figure out. Because it turns out these strategies are rooted in a theory about reading that came to be known as cueing, which not everyone calls it that. The basic idea is that readers use different kind of information or cues to identify words as they're reading. Now, this theory was first sort of proposed back in the 1960s before a lot of this research was done about reading and how it works, before we sort of figured out answers to these questions. How do we read? So this theory actually seemed like a really good idea. The basic idea behind the cueing theory is that readers don't have to sound out written words to know what they are. They can sound out the words, but they don't have to because they can use lots of other strategies to try to figure out the words. They can do things like look at the first letter and use the context, think of a word that makes sense. The problem is, this is not the way that skilled readers read. So At a Loss for Words is the reporting project I did in 2019, and it's about the cueing theory and about how this theory and the word reading strategies that are based on this theory became foundational in reading curriculum, assessments, and intervention programs that are popular in American schools that say they use a balanced literacy approach to teaching reading. But this cueing theory, as I said, isn't right. It's not how skilled reading works. And cognitive scientists showed this back in the 1970s and 80s. Skilled readers do not use cues and context to identify words as they're reading. In fact, what scientists discovered is that this is the way struggling readers read. So struggling readers often have a really hard time with word identification. Too many of the words that they come across are little mysteries, series of letters they don't know and can't quite figure out. So they use a bunch of other strategies to try to figure out what the words say. When they come across a word they don't know, they look at the first letter, first few letters, they try to think of a word that makes sense. In other words, they use the context to kind of try to come up with a word that fits. And when they can't figure out what a word is, using context clues, they skip the word. Often, they can get the gist of what they're reading this way. But using context, guessing, and skipping words a lot, this is not what reading is like when you're a skilled reader. What cognitive scientists figured out is that this is actually a key difference between skilled readers and unskilled readers. Skilled readers can immediately and accurately recognize lots and lots and lots of words. They don't need to guess or predict or use context. Skilled readers know tens of thousands of words instantly on sight. In fact, if you're a skilled reader, your brain has gotten so good at reading words that you actually process the word book faster than you process a picture of a book. So how did your brain get so good at that? Because we're not born with brains that are designed to do it, but we can get really, really good at it. And it happens through this process that is known as orthographic mapping. And I think it's really important to know just a little bit about what orthographic mapping is to understand why teaching kids how to decode words is so important. Teaching kids how to do that. And for understanding why teaching kids those other strategies is not a good idea. So here's a really quick and simplified explanation of orthographic mapping. It is basically the process. It's sort of an unconscious cognitive process that we use to store printed words in our long-term memory. Here's how you do it. You attend closely to how a written word is spelled, and you link that sequence of letters to the word's pronunciation and meaning. So for a very basic example, a child comes into kindergarten knowing the meaning and pronunciation of the word cat. The word gets orthographically mapped into her memory when she links the sounds in that word, cat, to the written word, cat. So that requires an awareness of the speech sounds and words, phonemic awareness. It requires an understanding of how those sounds are represented by letters, that's phonics. So you need to have phonemic awareness and phonics to orthographically map words into your long-term memory. But once a word has been orthographically mapped to your memory, you know it instantly on sight. In fact, you cannot suppress your ability to read that word. You don't have to consciously, laboriously sound out the word when you see it, but you know the word. You have access to the word instantly. Because at some point, maybe when you were like in first grade, you successfully sounded out that word. And you linked the spelling of that word in your mind with the meaning and pronunciation of that word. So by about second grade, a typically developing reader who's learning English and has good phonics skills usually needs just a few exposures to a word through its pronunciation, its spelling, and its meaning. All those three things, and bam, that word gets mapped to her memory. And the more words that a reader maps to her memory in this way, the more she can focus on the meaning of what she's reading, because she's not using her brain power to identify the words. She's using her brain power to understand what she's reading, and that's the goal, for readers to understand what they're reading. But when teachers use the cueing system I told you about, when they teach all those other word reading strategies, they may actually be impeding the orthographic mapping process. So I'm going to explain with a little story. These are little girls in Oakland, California, when they were in first grade, and a literacy coach who worked with these girls came to see that teaching the cueing system was actually making it harder for many of her students to learn how to read. The coach's name is Margaret Goldberg, and she was hired by the Oakland Unified School District to teach something called Leveled Literacy Intervention, or LLI. LLI is a reading intervention program that does include some phonics instruction. Because remember, one of the cues for figuring out a word is to use the letters. But LLI is rooted in that theory that I told you about, that letters are one way to figure out a word, but there are lots of other ways too. So kids are also taught that when they come to a word they don't know, they can use the pictures and the context to try to come up with the word is. So Margaret Goldberg started teaching LLI. That's one of the things she was hired to do. But at about the same time, she found a bunch of unopened material sitting on a shelf in her school collecting dust. There's a lot of those in our schools. And it was a systematic phonics and phonemic awareness program that teaches kids that when they come to a word they don't know, they sound it out. And it does not include any of those other cueing strategies. And in this phonics and phonemic awareness program, beginning readers practice reading in decodable books that contain words with spelling patterns they have been taught. So they don't have to guess at the words. They don't need the cueing strategies. Margaret started teaching some of her groups of students LLI with the cueing strategies, and some of her groups she taught this systematic phonics and phonemic awareness program with none of the cueing. And she started to notice differences between the two groups of children, not just in how well they were reading, but in the way they approached their reading. So she and a colleague recorded first graders talking about what makes them good readers. So I'm going to play this video for you. Mia is the little girl in the white shirt. She was learning phonics and no cueing. And Jabria is in the pink jacket. She was taught the cueing system.
Yes, what makes you good readers?
I learn a lot. Because I look at the pictures and I read it.
Ooh. Do you remember when you were little and you didn't know how to read?
Yes.
Like when you started
Kinda.
kindergarten?
Yeah.
What helped you learn how to read? How did you learn?
By looking at the pictures,
Anything else?
looking at the words, and sounding them out.
So I hope you all could hear that. Margaret Goldberg was saying this over and over again in her two groups of children, right? So one group was taking away from their reading instruction that reading is about looking closely at words and sounding them out. And the other group of children was learning that when you come to a word you don't know, you don't have to look carefully at the word and try to connect the spelling with the pronunciation and the meaning. Instead, you can look away from the word. You can look at the pictures, you can look at the other words in the sentence. Basically, you search around for clues to help you identify the word. But remember, orthographic mapping requires you to look carefully at words so that your brain links the spelling with the sounds and the meaning. And cueing teaches kids to look away from the words. So here's what Margaret Goldberg said to me about the kids in her LLI groups. She said, I did lasting damage to these kids. It was so hard to ever get them to stop looking at a picture to guess what a word would be. It was so hard to ever get them to slow down and sound a word out. As Margaret was noticing the difference between her two groups of students, she was discovering all of the scientific research on reading, which was not stuff that she knew or had ever been taught. And she was really shocked by what she was learning and how different it was from what the curriculum materials were telling her about how reading works. But what Margaret was learning from the curriculum materials about how reading works is what a lot of teachers were learning about how reading works, because instructional approaches that include cueing are all over American classrooms. And you don't even need to have a program that includes it. Teachers pass these things out to each other all the time. There's this idea that was in the water, and it was this idea that you don't have to sound out the words. So kids all over the country are not being taught what they need to know about written English in order to actually read the words and become good readers. So these are NAEP scores, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. As I'm sure you all know, this is a test that is given every 2 years to a sample of kids all over the country when they're in 4th and 8th grade, and they take it in 12th grade too. And this slide is actually compiling 4th grade NAEP reading scores before COVID. Okay, things are worse now, but the 2019 NAEP scores showed that more than a third of all 4th graders could not read at a basic level. So we're not talking about proficiency here. We're talking about basic. More than a third of all 4th graders could not read on even a basic level. And this slide shows the differences among ethnic and racial groups. So look at the first bar. That represents Black 4th graders. The 2019 NAEP showed that 82% of Black 4th graders were basic or below in reading. Think about that, more than 8 in 10, and it's worse now. A class of 20 black kids, many places in this country, there are classes of 20 black kids, and only 4 of them were proficient readers. When I hear people try to explain these scores, something I almost always hear is poverty. They say poverty is why kids are struggling with reading, and I am not saying that poverty has nothing to do with it. Poverty absolutely plays a role, especially on the language comprehension side of things, and that is a really important side. But this is bigger than poverty. There are more kids struggling with reading than struggling with poverty in this country. And I think we've been blaming poverty when part of what's going on here has to do with wealth. Some kids are lucky enough to be born into families that can take care of the problem if they are not taught how to read in school. They have a safety net, and the safety net is their parents and their parents' checkbooks. Some kids are getting the instruction they need, but a lot of kids aren't. They aren't being taught how to read. This is really an equity issue. It's a civil rights issue. Fixing this problem is about making a lot of different things work together. Fixing this problem is not just about passing a law. It is about implementing good policies that fundamentally support the teachers and school and district leaders that want to get this right, desperately want to get it right, and there are more and more of them every day. And getting it right is not just about changing the way kids are taught to read the words. Teaching kids how to read the words might actually be the easier part. The comprehension part is really complex and so critical. Everyone has to be paying attention to all of the parts here. And I think it's really important for everybody to stay humble and curious in this endeavor to get reading instruction right, and to stay open to course correction, and to never believe so deeply in something or someone that you can't or aren't willing to question it. So I'm going to wrap up here with a reading list. So these are some of the books and articles that have taught me the most over the past several years. There's just 10 things on this list. There could have been 100. You can find this reading list on the Soul to Story website. It's soultostory.org. I encourage you to dig in because this stuff is really fascinating, and there are like some long books on here, some shorter articles. There's a lot of ways that you can gain access or encourage others who haven't to start to read about this stuff. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being here, and I am really looking forward to all of your questions. Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. That was super. And I'm going to ask Jennifer Swindell to lead us in the conversation. And Jennifer is managing editor of Idaho Ed News. She's a veteran Idaho journalist who spent most of her 30-year career at the Idaho Statesman, where she broke ground as the paper's first female sports editor. She's a true innovator in the journalism space and launched Idaho Ed News over a decade ago. Amazing what you've built. She has turned it into the go-to source for what's happening in Idaho education. Having played golf once with Jennifer, she's also a scratch golfer or close to it. With that, thank you, Jennifer. Turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And that was wonderful. Thank you, Emily, for coming to Idaho and sharing what you've learned. I was inspired by your thoughts and encouraged that it's possible. I have a couple of questions, actually, and then I'll open it up to any of your questions. But you did mention there at the end that it requires good policy.
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like?
Well, you know, I always worry because I'm a journalist. I'm not a policy person. I don't feel like it's my role to recommend policy. But obviously there are a lot of laws being passed. There's a lot of policy being crafted, and there has actually been for a long time. There's actually been there's been really a wave of legislation over the past 10 years. We know that there's been this particular year, I think at our last count, we had 22 states had proposed some sort of new legislation around reading since Soul to Story came out, which was about a year ago. I think that, if I got my numbers right, 15 have passed something. So I don't think I'm the person here who's going to recommend policy. Policy is obviously an important tool, and I'll tell you what I've heard over the years. So a lot of the awareness about all of this science of reading stuff is really due to parents and parent activism over the past 10 or 15 years, particularly the parents of kids with dyslexia. They have really focused on the fact that their kids are the most injured, the most damaged when kids don't teach reading, but lots of kids are being injured when schools aren't teaching reading. And I really think those parents have gotten a lot of attention, and a lot of why we're doing this is like bubbling up from the bottom, right? There's been a bottom up. Parents and increasingly teachers, and many times it's the teacher who's also a parent who's been teaching first grade for 10 years, and then their son goes and can't learn how to read, and they don't know how to teach them. And boy, is that a moment of going down the rabbit hole and discovering all this stuff and being like, why didn't I learn it? And then they can see the faces, remember the names of the kids in their classes over the years that they knew they weren't teaching, and they had a gut level feeling that something wasn't quite right. But they were working as hard as they could, and they were doing all the things that they were supposed to, and it wasn't working. And they, without realizing it in many cases, and they say this to me painfully through tears, they sort of blame the kids. They blame the families. And then it's their kid. And they're like, wait a minute, I've done everything right. I've read to my kid forever, and he can't read, and I don't know how to do it. And wait, who am I? So a lot of this has been bubbling up from the parents and increasingly the teachers. And the role of and many of them are looking up, being like, we need help. We need policy, whether that's from our principal, our superintendent, our school board, our state legislature, or our governor, because we need resources, we need stuff. And so now there's a lot of that stuff coming top down. And I just think good outcomes come from a really delicate balance between bottom up and top down. And so we're just in the middle of that moment right now. There's a lot of response. Sometimes top-down policies, we know top-down policies are not perfect. They have unintended consequences. And so I just really hope that this sort of balance between bottom up and top down keeps going. And that's what I was saying at the end about everyone staying humble and curious. Some of the things that are being passed now may not have the intended consequences. And so then change it. Stay on it. Don't let, what I would say to the people in this room is, don't let this one go. We too often in education and in politics and policy focus on something, and then something else comes along and we focus on that. I think everyone's got to be in this for the long haul. We can't let the headlines in a few years be like, oh, well, we tried the science of reading and that didn't work. Well, why didn't it work? It's going to have something to do with the implementation because the research is really solid. And the very last thing I will say, it's very hard for people who are leaders of schools and people who are politicians to not make promises like, we'll have 90% of our kids proficient in 2 years. That's not going to happen. Make realistic goals so that you can meet them. And what I think everyone should be focusing on is getting the kids who are below basic on NAEP and in your state tests. We should have barely any kids in that. That's going to be success. Getting 90% of kids proficient, especially on NAEP proficiency is actually set pretty high. That's not realistic, and it's a hard thing to say because it seems like you're giving up on kids. But let's be realistic here. We're giving up on kids when we're not even giving them basic reading skills. If they can have basic reading skills, they can get through in life and they can make their own decisions about whether they want to love reading and read all the time. But as long as they can read, that's really what we need to be focused on. And I would just urge policymakers to change the message, not proficiency. Let's get rid of all those kids who are below basic because we are in crisis with the percentage of kids that are there and stuck there.
Thank you. In Idaho, preschool and all-day kindergarten are optional for schools and for parents. With that in mind, at what age is the science of reading most effective?
Well, I think the research shows, I think some of what's happened is there's been a decent amount of sort of pushback from the belief that it'll all come together in time and this is just developmental and exposed and we don't want to harm kids by teaching them too early. And I think what we actually know is there's a lot to becoming a good reader that can be done in very developmentally appropriate ways when kids were little. And that language comprehension part of things is so critical. So preschool and kindergarten really should and can be about helping, especially to make up the gaps that kids already come to school with in terms of their sort of knowledge of the world and their vocabulary. Some kids know just, couple hundred words, and some kids are coming into school knowing thousands of words, And so I think that's where preschool and kindergarten can really have a role. But I think the other thing one of the reasons I like to point out what I do about written English and how long it takes is, people point to other countries like Finland, where they don't teach kids to read until they're a little bit older, but Finnish is really easy to learn how to read. We've actually got a big task here. So kids can begin to learn how to read. They can be taught how to decode words when they're 5. Most kids are ready for that. And if it's going to take 3 years to teach kids written English, and we want them to be reading by the end of 2nd or in 3rd grade, we got to start in kindergarten.
Idaho has, over the last several years, made significant funding towards targeted for reading intervention, and it's a priority of the state board. But the districts and the schools use that money in a variety of ways. There's not a systemic way to use that money. Is that a good use of the money, the local control, or should the state take a more active role in deciding how it's being spent?
Again, I'm not sure that is my role to say. I mean, I think that in education in general, all across America, we really fundamentally, all education systems are local control. There's some more extreme than other. My understanding is in Idaho, you're really a local control state. And that is baked deep into our system. It's actually written into the establishment of the Federal Department of Education in, I think it was 1979, essentially that the feds can't tell schools really what to teach and how to teach it, and that's true in some, I don't know if it's written into your constitution, it's in some state constitutions. That's just a reality that we have in America, and I think many of us know that there are many good things about that. But there's always a delicate balance between making sure that people have direction and resources and know things like all the scientific research, and state laws and state departments of education can play a really important role in making sure that schools know what they need to know. So I don't think that means you need to dictate this is the intervention program that everyone needs to use. And I think it's very clear. I think there's not like one curriculum or one intervention program that everyone should be used. We're a market-based economy. There are a lot of products out there, and that's one of the things that people are struggling with, is trying to understand those products. But this is, at the end of the day, this is not, even though I know that some of this focus on curriculum and programs is in part being, my reporting has put the lens on that. What I was trying to do by focusing on curriculum was helping people understand that there are ideas about reading in the curriculum that teachers are learning, and in the absence of being taught what they need to know in their teacher preparation programs, which is often the case, they are actually learning things from their colleagues in their schools, in their professional development, from their preparation programs. And I wanted to point out there are some ideas about reading that have been long held, but don't line up with the evidence, that are deeply baked into this, and we need to show that. So getting rid of something that is founded in a bunch of ideas that aren't right, it doesn't mean everything about that program is bad, but there are some fundamental things that is resting on a flawed theory. Getting rid of that may be a good idea. It doesn't mean that the best idea or the first idea or the thing that's going to fix all your programs is just to buy something new. It's not. And what I've learned from people around the country is that leading with a curriculum change may not actually be the right thing. Leading with the knowledge of the administrators and the teachers is the right thing. And then they can make good choices about a curriculum that's going to work well. They can suss out, no curriculum's perfect, but if you really build the teacher knowledge, they can actually use a flawed curriculum well, as long as they've got a pretty good one that's really like getting them in the right direction, and they've got good assessments and good intervention programs. That stuff is really key. There never will be a perfect curriculum. But there are a lot of them out there claiming they're perfect, but no one's perfect, so don't believe them.
I have another question, and then I'll open it up to any questions you all might have. Can you explain why there's such a divide between the research and the practice?
Well, I mean, that's what I think a lot of people have been trying to figure out for years. I mean, so when I started reporting on this, of course, many people drew my attention to the teacher preparation problem. And that, there has been attention on that, and we have lots of surveys and research and plenty of anecdotal evidence that I've gotten from teachers that that is a problem and remains a problem, with some changes occurring. I think there really are some changes occurring in teacher prep. So I sort of pointed to that and was like looking at that back in like 2018 and 2019 and some of the earlier reporting I was doing. But one of the things I realized along the way is, like, if a good witch could come down and take a wand and just fix teacher prep, we still have a problem. Millions and millions of teachers who are in schools right now all of us learn a lot of what we know on the job. Teachers are never going to be fully prepared for anything. No, none of us are. So you've got to look at what's in the schools. And that's when I started to realize, oh, there are these ideas about reading that everyone's sort of swimming in without really realizing that they have beliefs about how kids learn to read that aren't right. And so we got to like lift that up. So teacher prep is still a really important part of the problem because people wouldn't have been as susceptible to ideas about reading that aren't right if they had had a good solid foundation. So if you can, in a 2-year preparation program or a 9-month one or a 4-year one, give teachers a good grounding in reading and how it works and what reading disabilities are all about and how you really teach that and how you teach kids written English, if they can be given that, they just wouldn't have been as susceptible to things that were so off. And we've been susceptible to things that were off for a long time. So it's definitely a part of the solution. But it's just, like I said, there's a lot of pieces here. That's an important one. And also maybe the hardest to fix. There's a lot of resistance in schools of education for good reason, because there are people in schools of education who have staked their careers on this. They've been teaching teachers these ideas. They've been publishing. They've been selling their services as professional development. It's a big thing. They have skin in the game. Most teachers in the classroom don't. They just want to teach their kids to read. Please help me do that. I don't have what I need to do that. I need help.
All right. If you have a question for Emily, please come down to the middle.
Hi. Hi, I'm Andy. I run a couple schools here in Idaho.
I think maybe it's not on. Is it on? Sorry, I'm a microphone person.
Hello, hello.
There it is.
There we go. I got to talk closer to it. Thinking about this idea that, ongoing professional development, whatever we want to call it, teacher learning, really, given the structure of most American schools, 5-day school week, very little time for collaboration and learning, what have you seen in your travels around the country that works to give teachers and leaders, school leaders, and thank you for saying that, the space to do that effectively over the long term?
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging. Of course, fixing these problems that are, I think, sort of deeply baked into the way that we've organized education in this country, we don't leave nearly enough time for teacher learning. Several years ago, I sort of learned about how they do it in Japan and like Japanese lesson study, which is really fascinating. And there are in other countries, teachers' school days are structured where they have a certain amount of time that they're standing in front of the kids, but they have much more time where they're learning things, collaborating with each other, watching each other teach. In some schools in Japan, teachers actually have like their own offices, not just their classroom, like that many of us do. Like if you want to be able to like quiet and think and read, you get an office to do it. That's so awesome. So this is, the problem, I think, this is why this is so complex. There are things about teaching in the way we've structured it, teacher working conditions, how we pay teachers, how we value teachers, that get at the heart of why fixing this problem is going to be hard. We don't have a system that is making this easy on anyone. What I have learned in my reporting is that administrators are key. If you don't make sure that the administrators are bought in and understand this, it's not going to work. So I think that's really important, and I really do think when teachers are introduced to these ideas, it is such an aha for so many of them, and they are often have grief and regret and guilt at first, but they are pretty quickly like, bring it on. Please help me learn more. And the kinds of emails that I get that move me the most are from the teachers who are like, I've been teaching for 21 years. I didn't know this. I've been teaching for 29. I was in Kansas the other day, and there was a woman who'd been teaching for 41 years, and she finally started learning about this, and she's like, I'm not retiring. I'm going to keep doing this. So I think it has to be about making it a priority. And I think that a lot of leaders, when the leaders are bought in, they can figure out a way to do that. But it does take things like money, paying teachers for their time, and making them come over the summer, but making sure that they're paid for their time, and that's why things like what legislatures can do, what a governor can do to free up resources is an important part of the puzzle.
We have another question.
Mike, bullet down on too much. Sorry. Too much, Mike.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Stacy. I teach 3rd grade. And I'm pretty proud of our elementary. I think in the last couple of years we've had our aha moment. But what do you suggest we do with our students that have already fallen through the cracks? Those middle school, those high school students. What kind of interventions have you seen throughout your trial?
Yeah, I get asked this question all the time. I don't really know the answer, and I'd really like to do more reporting on this. I know it's coming up in more and more, and I guess the thing that I say is I think schools have to recognize that this is part of what they've got to do. If they're going in and doing a big overhaul in K-2 reading instruction, it is incumbent on them to think about what are we doing for the kids that we didn't teach how to read. That's got to be part of it. It's harder when kids get older for all kinds of reasons, for reasons that just have to do, for practical, structural reasons. When, where in the school day, what do you take them out of? Who teaches them? How do you teach them? There are more and more sort of programs and tools and materials. Like I hear a lot of times people say, well, what are the appropriate materials to use for older kids? I'm not going to sort of name products and stuff, but they exist. And there are more and more of them. Like there's a recognition that this is a problem. There are good materials and programs that can be used with older kids. But it's still a challenge of who's going to really get trained in that as a teacher, where in the school day. And then I think one of the most important things for everyone to recognize is that by the time a kid is in upper elementary or middle school or high school and they're really struggling with reading, they've got a lot of like stuff they've got to deal with that's emotional, right? Like they feel embarrassed and ashamed. They are resistant. They don't necessarily even want someone to try to teach them because they've tried. So you've got to figure out how to deal with that one. And I don't know the answer, but I just know that's an important part of what everyone has to think about. But it's incumbent on schools to think about their older kids.
Anyone else?
It's so much better with the mic down here. Sorry.
Hi.
Yeah. I think you have to kind of eat that mic and not this one.
Emily, I love your name. I'm also Emily.
Oh, hi, Emily. Did you read the New York Times article about Emily? There was this great New York Times article about the name. We're like a little black dress.
Of course.
Why are there so many Emilys?
I know. I work hand in hand with Andy, and one of the things that I am curious about is your thoughts on a parent's role and how do schools engage with parents and what type of resources or tools or collaboration and what that might look like and what that might look like with outcomes with students.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I really do think we're talking about all of this now because of parents. So I think we have to be grateful to parents. And I think, often the relationship is kind of contentious. And I think it's really important actually for schools, I think, really have a job to do to not make that contentious. The parents are coming because they care about their kids. They're the ones who are they're seeing it more than you are. They know more than you do about what is going on with their kids, so listen to them. And what I say to parents who are really struggling with schools is find the other parents who are in the same situation. Learn from them, talk to them, what have they done? You can go, I think people are more powerful in numbers than one-on-one. So many parents have been dealing with this. They thought they were the only one. Schools, I think in some ways schools have really not dealt well with parents whose kids are really struggling. And I think at the root of it actually it's like a little bit of empathy here, is that the schools didn't know enough about reading and how it works and how kids learn to do it, so they really didn't know how to help a lot of the struggling readers. So I really, and I think there are many examples where parents and schools can sort of work together and not be embattled. But there's a lot of embattlement, and part of that is because we have a very important federal law that says that when kids are struggling with reading, they have to be given the instruction that will help them learn to read. And many schools have been failing on that, and the parents have been calling them, and they have that law, and there are state laws too, and they're using those laws. But as soon as you start talking about laws and lawyers, things get contentious and they get expensive. And so the last thing I'll say is one of the reasons why I really want to focus on core instruction, and I think this is important for everyone to realize, getting core instruction better is super important. We can prevent a lot of reading problems. I think one of the most important reasons to get core instruction better is it'll help you identify the kids who are struggling faster. And the fixing core instruction isn't going to fix it for all kids. There are still going to be kids who need more than that, who need much more attention. So not only is it incumbent on schools to think about what they're doing with the older kids, but it's really incumbent on them to think about our most struggling readers, what are we doing? And you are obligated by federal and in many cases state law to do it. So schools have to be doing that much better.
All right, we have time for one more question.
I'm also Emily.
Oh my gosh, see?
I wanted to thank you for what you've done to bring such a spotlight to some of the issues that many of us have seen for many, many years, and this is on fire, and I'm happy to be a part of it. I really want to know what your next project is.
Good question. So, I mean, obviously, I'm a reporter. I'm a documentary reporter at heart, actually, and there's a lot to document now, right? A lot is happening. So I feel like that is going to be my job and many other reporters' jobs over the next many years, is to go out and see what's working, what's not, and why, and not be able to call out. This is why everyone needs to stay humble, right? And I really want school leaders, and maybe we're going to get that on this panel, to be able to be open about, well, we're trying to do the science of reading, which is, you can't do the science of reading. It's a body of research. That term is being misused. That drives me crazy. But anyway, it's just going to be really important for people to recognize that this is not all going to, we're not going to fix all of our problems, and people should be really transparent. Well, we tried this and this didn't work. Or it worked for some of the kids, but we're still really struggling with the older kids. We're still really struggling with the kids who are the English language learners. We're still really struggling with the kids who are the most in need. And, we tried this and we didn't figure it out. And maybe we invested in something and we need to invest in something different. Let's get this right, because it's so important. And there's urgency around this, and I get this, because there are kids in school right now who aren't learning how to read. But when people try to do this too urgently, and when you make promises that are going to fail, the whole thing goes off the rails. It's much better, actually, to do this well than to do it fast, even though it's very hard to say that to a politician or a school leader.
At Idaho Ed News, we're really trying to focus on solutions journalism, and the most recent reading scores were just made public last week, and there's some real bright spots in there. West Ada, I see Dr. Bub there, who's leads our largest district, had some of the best scores. And so, you just naturally ask yourself, well, what's going right there?
Absolutely.
And we're going to try to do more of those stories, maybe just to focus on. I
think solutions journalism is so important, and it is, investigative journalism is always about sort of finding the problems and identifying them. Solutions journalism is the other way, and that's really important, because I think in all of this, what people do need to see is, okay, where is it working and why is it working there? What about what they did can we do? And I think that's just going to be really important for people to highlight those.
Right, journalists are very good at identifying the problem, but it's over and over. And I get it. We have a problem.
Right.
So
it's
what
solutions
are the solutions?
time. It's solutions time.
So thank you for coming today and helping us kind of talk about these issues.
All right. We have 1 minute left. Looking forward to the rest of the day. Thank you all very much for coming.
All right, we're going to keep moving on. Thank you. That was great. Both of you did a super job. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for the audience participation. We're going to now pivot to a couple Idaho-based school leaders, and our leader of that panel is going to be Alan Gottlieb, who is a Denver-based journalist and communications consultant. He has written on education issues for 25 years. He founded Ed News Colorado, which later became Chalkbeat, and which was also the early model for Idaho Ed News. He's a former board member of the Idaho Ed News, and he has researched and written articles for the J.A. and Catherine Albertson's Family Foundation, for Bloom here in Idaho. He's a true pro. He's the author of 2 books, one nonfiction, one fiction. His coverage of the Colorado Rockies' first year of experience is must read for any baseball fans out there. And with that, Alan, I'll turn it over to you.
Sorry.
Okay, no. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Emily's done great work, and I think she's very humble because I think the work she's done is actually, there has been a lot of bubbling up, but I think a lot of the bubbling up that's happened is because people became aware of what's going on and has been going on over the years because of her reporting. So I think she just deserves a huge amount of credit for what she's done over the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. So kudos to her. Thank you. I have here 2 distinguished school leaders from the Treasure Valley, each of whom runs either a charter school or a charter school network, and I'm going to let them do most of the introduction of themselves. But immediately to my left is Andy Johnson, who is with the SAGE network of 2 schools, and on the other side of Andy is Anthony Haskett, who is the director principal of Mosaic's charter school. What I want to do is just start out and have each of them, starting with Andy, tell us a little bit about yourselves, where you're from, your background, your professional journey, and how you came to education, because I think all of that will sort of lead into the conversation about reading and how you've made changes in your schools. So let's start with Andy, and then, yeah.
Is it on now? The red light indicates that it's on. Thank you. Have I got this mic right? My name's Andy. I'm lucky enough to run a small network of 2 charter schools here in Idaho. I didn't start my life as an educator, a teacher. I graduated from a, frankly, fairly mediocre high school in rural Missouri. Great people. Really was inspired to be a student by learning French, which was a great thing for me. I actually spent a long career in the Army. I enlisted at 17. I did not go to college first. I went straight into the Army. I loved it. Eventually became an officer, retired in 2007, moved here to Idaho. My wife is actually the educator in the family. She was a professor here at Boise State, deeply involved in reading and assessment, and frankly is the source of pretty much everything I know, including about reading. And so, just lucky enough to come here to the SAGE Network, kind of in the middle of COVID. I joined in 2020. And went straight out because I wasn't yet the executive director. My boss then, Keith Donahue, works for Bloom and is on our board, said, Andy, I need you to go out to our school in Middleton. We need some help out there. And I discovered an incredible team of people who were doing their absolute best to teach kids in the middle of a pandemic without the right resources and frankly without the right approach. And we'll talk more about that. But I just want to throw a shout out to my mom and a lot of what Emily said about reading. I remember talking to her when I got out in Middleton, our school in Middleton. I said, Mom, how did you teach us to read? Because I just, like Emily, just remember being a great reader from early on. And I said, did you teach us the letter sounds and all that? She said, well, how else would you do it? So, that's a poor Irish girl going to a Catholic school in England in 1950, and she's like, it's been around. We know how to do this, right? And anyway, I've rambled, and I'm 3 paragraphs in when I should have only been 1, so I'll turn it over to Anthony.
My mic cord's a little shorter than yours, Andy, so we'll scoot over a little bit there, and I'll do my best. My name's Anthony Haskett. I grew up in the Treasure Valley. I'm a Homedale grad. I went to the Homedale school system, K-12, and I went to NNU for my undergraduate in elementary education, and I worked in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade teaching. It was great to see Dr. Russell's here. He was my principal, and I have great admiration for his leadership over there in Nampa School District. And so I was a teacher in the classroom, unlike Andy. Andy, he's an Army guy. And I got my admin degree and moved to Idaho Arts Charter School, which was my first experience being in a charter. And while I was there, I was given the opportunity to establish a new charter school called Mosaic's Public School. And we opened up in September 2020. We opened up kindergarten through 4th grade, and we are a STEAM school. So STEAM is STEM plus the arts. I took my Idaho Arts background, and we really want to engage kids in critical thinking, problem analysis, communication, creativity. We really want to make arts like a purposeful expression of ideas. And we fell victim to being sold a story. And I could talk more about that later, but our goal moving into Caldwell, which is where our school is located, is to inspire our students, who a lot of them come from poverty and from the rural background, kind of like I did as a kid, to inspire them to become something more than what their parents do. Because what I found is, growing up in Homedale, a lot of us kind of figured out what our parents did, and we did that. My mom's a special education teacher, so she told me to volunteer at migrant summer school, and that's how I got my first taste of education. And the next year I was an aide in the preschool program there at migrant summer school, and that was my first real job. And it stuck. So I've been here, and I've been working in education 16 years now, and there's always a lot to learn and a lot to reflect on. And as I was joking with some people, being humble, I'm one of the expert idiots on the on the panel, because it was like you think you know something and then you don't, and you're like, oh dear, and then you make changes, and when you know better, you do better, and that's been our motto at Mosaics, and it's what we're going to continue doing.
Well, the expert idiot is a perfect segue into my next question, which is, when you listen to Emily's presentation, listen to the podcast, whatever, like how did that track with your own experience as a school leader in terms of coming in your case, Andy, to a school that already existed, and in your case, starting a school, what you saw about how reading was being taught, and then what adjustments you've decided you had to make?
So when we were first writing the charter for Mosaics, one of the things that we were trying to do was to help our teachers develop a capacity as a reading teacher. And that was one of the things that Lucy Calkin's program, because we used the units of reading and writing, and she came out with phonics because that was her weak spot. And she said, hey, I fixed it. And I was like, this is systematic. We want to do the whole program. And we were trying to get our teachers equipped with the skills, and she did a really good job of narrating everything in her books. And the goal was to really equip kind of that professional development goal. And one of the things that Lucy promised was helping kids develop the love of learning within text, like a full book. And as a teacher of 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, we were using a program called Open Court. It's a basal reader, and you get snippets of lots of different stories, and you never get to engage kids in like a true reading experience as a teacher. And that was really frustrating for me as a teacher. I'm like, 4th grade teacher at Ronald Reagan Elementary. We read one chapter of Stuart Little in the middle of the book, and we focus on basically just a reading strategy. So you read the same chapter 3 times. You have a different lens on it every single time. And I didn't find that actually effective for a lot of my kids as a teacher, because I didn't see the kids really being able to expand that skill, and they didn't really get that love of learning. So as we're developing our charter, we're like, what can we do to help our kids get in real text and really grapple with some of these? And we looked at this program, which was based on some faulty reasoning, to do that. And honestly, within about a month and a half of our phonics program, we realized there was an issue, and we pivoted, and we went to Wilson Language's Foundations program. And I've got a couple teachers here, and they can tell you it was a crazy shift, because we did that pretty much within 3 months of opening. We kind of said, this isn't working, this isn't good, and we shifted. Was it perfect? No, it wasn't. But it was better, and it was a lot better, and we've seen like our IRI scores. We started when we opened up, we were about 50% last year, where we ended the year at 70%. Like, we've got slow growth consistently, and part of that is because we've been doing a systematic decoding. But when it comes to like, what are we doing, what are we learning, it really was more of like, what was our purpose? Our purpose was to inspire kids to read. What did we see? We didn't see it. And so we backed away, and we actually took a guided reading approach to individualized instruction for a couple years, as we started to figure out what is it that we need in Scarborough's rope as a systematic approach to literacy. So we've taken this journey. We've actually implemented this year a program called Wit and Wisdom that's really about content knowledge building. And that, once again, is a heavy lift, because it's doing all the things on the top language comprehension part of a rope that we didn't have as a program. And we use Foundations for that bottom part. So I took a page from your book, Andy. I rambled. But it really is about like looking at the data and looking at what our kids need, and are we meeting those needs, and how do we adjust, and then having a great staff who's willing to go along with the ride. Because we asked them to do a lot of really hard things. We do a lot of learning. We built about 20 professional development days into our calendar to help guide that. So it's been a wild ride, and I'll let Andy go.
I just want to ask a quick follow-up, Anthony, and I don't want to get too into the weeds or too technical, but I'm just really curious that you adopted the Lucy Calkins phonics program that she put out with, but you said it wasn't solid, it wasn't based. So, I mean, I think that's one interesting question, right, that's raised by this is, you can call something something, but it's not doing the thing it's supposed to do. So, I mean, if you can explain it so that it's not too technical,
Sure.
What was wrong with that phonics program?
It wasn't systematic and direct. That's the big idea. So when you teach phonics, you need to say A says A says A, and here's the ways that it goes about it. She didn't teach it that directly, and there were some other things that steered teachers in the wrong direction. So once we opened it up, unboxed it, really got going, we realized this is not how you teach phonics, and we know that, and we pivoted.
Interesting. Thank you. And Andy, similar with you, you got to Sage, I think you said it was 2020, so it's always obviously an interesting year in any event. But what did you see? How did you lean on your wife for help? And how have you pivoted?
That's a great question. I will probably do 3 paragraphs as well. I'll try to go quickly. One of the things Emily brought up when she was up here was leadership really matters, and I give a shout out to West Ada because I know they've been doing a lot of work to emphasize principal level leadership and the importance of that and moving anything forward. And I'm probably more than just a little bit convinced that has a direct impact on the success they had last year, and I'm sure going forward. I do think leadership matters. And I think leadership doesn't just come from principals, it comes from teachers, it comes from parents. Leadership can be a shared endeavor, it can be a lonely endeavor, it can be all those things, but leadership really matters. And so I think getting the right folks in the right seat with the right direction, right goals, and the right attitude means the world. I firmly believe that. But when I arrived out there in Middleton, great group of people, really, really good people. Some pockets of folks out there, and I think this is important in any organization, who you need to connect with and share ideas about, because I think any change is going to come when you get like-minded people together, working together. Again, to Emily's point, like a lot of this change in our country around reading has come from parents to get together and say, hey, this is not working, let's get something going. So we had some folks out there that were really interested in doing that. We had, the school had adopted in the months before I got there, Fontes and Pinnell's program. For a lot of reasons, I already knew that wasn't a great approach to teaching reading because it's, for all the reasons Emily touched on, it's a lot of cueing and look at the pictures and guess, and they've got their own little, progress monitoring tool, which isn't frankly that effective because the readers aren't lined up with what kids need to know. So anyway, we knew that was bad, and then what made it worse is, let's say I arrived there in November, the actual reading program had arrived in October and was delivered to the gym, and teachers were told to go get it and start using it. So as you can imagine, that probably didn't, even with a bad program, that's probably not going to go that great, and it didn't. And so, kind of started really diving into this. I discovered we weren't doing like regular progress monitoring with a real tool. And, we touched on the IRI in here. It's not perfect. The governor said that, but it is a decent tool. It breaks things down. You can see where kids might be struggling. So we put that into place. Like, let's start getting some regular data. Let's start talking about it. And I'm kind of just, I haven't done this before. I've always been a good reader. I didn't worry about this. My kids were good readers. So we just worked through it, and then we just started using some different tools we had available through the IRI, and I had some teachers that were really interested in doing that, and then, we saw lots and lots of growth. And that particular team, and I love them both, they're still at the school, they still teach second grade together, and they're still the team that gets the most growth at the school. But now we're seeing lots of other teaching teams get lots of growth. And so we just really took that moment to decide as a team that we wanted to do a lot better. There's a real appetite for that. I had some folks that didn't really necessarily agree with that approach, and they went and did other things, and they're successful where they are, but, that we just changed our approach. And that spring, we really put some things in place similar to Anthony. Anthony and I connected very early and started talking about this problem. He moved to Foundations. Max Koltoff is here in the room, and coaches both Anthony and I and works at Bloom. You know, we spent a lot of time with Anthony and I spent a lot of time together, and with Max, and with another leader that runs another public charter school here, Future Public School, Amanda Cox, another great school leader. We really started talking regularly about what was working and what was not working. And Max helped, I think, both Anthony and I come to the conclusion that, you know, something like Foundations isn't perfect. To Emily's point, like, there's lots of curricula out there. None of them are perfect. It's really about building your teacher's knowledge about what does work. And so, you know, Max really encouraged us to push forward with that, you know, and we also wanted curricula that didn't require a ton of brain power and time to get started. Anthony's point, I think he pivoted maybe in early November, and then we were a little bit later to that. But the other thing I just want to say, really proud of him, to Emily's point again about teacher preparedness to do this, and, you know, we've got, you know, a continuum of issues around reading, and credit to the State Department of Education for committing to the reading project, the Smart Reading Project. I'm super proud to say that every one of our K-3 teachers at both schools is involved in that in either year one or year two. And then having someone like Louisa Moats in our state who has helped our state shape that, that is huge, that we're all engaged, including me. I'm in the project as well, but I haven't been keeping up on my homework, so don't tell my cohort leader, who I see tomorrow, and she's right there. Dang it, just blew it. I've got a lot of stuff to do tonight. But that has been instrumental in helping our teachers. Now they're having real conversations about what reading looks like, how they can find the right tools at the right time to teach their kids. Again, I want to thank West Ada through a connection. You guys moved on from Journeys. We spent most of the summer driving to one of your elementary schools, retrieving that like Robinson Crusoe, because the readers involved in that were better than the ones we had as we moved to something better. So again, thanks to West Ada for sharing those with us. And hopefully they were allowed to do that, Superintendent Bub. If not, don't yell at them. No, dang it. I've blown it twice already. Anyway, I've rambled. That's kind of what we did, just made a decision, progress monitoring. We all knew we had to do better, getting teachers this right sorts of knowledge about how reading works, how kids learn to read. And back to my mom's thing, it's like, how else would you do it? You got to teach them the letters. Like, we knew that. Let's do it again. So anyway.
Thanks. I want to delve a little bit deeper into sort of to the early days of the change, because change leadership is obviously really important and difficult, and people tend to be invested in what they've learned and what they've been doing until and unless the evidence becomes so overwhelming that it's not working that they have to do something. So how did you manage that with your staffs, especially in the early days? What kind of resistance did you meet? And other than you're sort of diplomatically saying some of them were off doing other things very successfully, which suggests some people left, how did you get people to pivot?
Maybe I'll go first. It really was about noticing, pointing it out, and then I spent a lot of time talking to individual teachers and just calling out, like, hey, I know we're in a pandemic. I know that, you know, we've been in and out of remote versus live learning, and, you know, it was all the arguments about whether we should mask. There was a lot of distractions. I really tried to, as best I could, just be laser focused on reading and put the other stuff aside. Like, we couldn't fix math, you know, we couldn't fix this, we couldn't fix that. You know, in the pandemic, there were probably lots of school leaders noticed lots of behavior issues. We had those as well, especially at our school in Middleton. So we worked kind of, you know, to really work on keeping kids calm and in class and focused as much as we could, because we wanted as little turbulence in the classrooms as possible. That seemed super important. And then it really was about engaging with teaching teams who were super interested in this work, and then really highlighting great work when we saw it, and really celebrating growth at every possible opportunity. And then the other part of that, and this is also hard, is like delivering hard news to folks who weren't getting the results, right? Even little bits of results, or even grasping on and using good resources that we were all sharing. that's the hard part of leadership, is delivering the news to folks like, you've got to do better, and I'm willing to sit here and help you do that. But at the end of the day, they have to make the choice to do that. And, so we did a combination of things. We, got a coalition together who decided that reading was important. We engaged with stakeholders in and outside the school to bring that to light. We wrote about it. We talked about it. We visited classrooms. We held it up, talked to parents about it, found some tools to help us do it better. And we're not there yet, but we're getting there. And I guess that's how we did it. It really was just 3 or 4 teachers who were super motivated. And then as we got into the hiring season that spring, I was hiring a new school leader. It was very important to me that this person was on board with that idea. And then every teacher we hired in the elementary school, one of our first questions was, what do you believe about teaching kids to read? And, we were pretty clear about what we believed, and we just invited them, like, we'd love you to be here, but if you can't do that, you can't be on this team, because we had made that central to what we're doing. And so some folks came to us, some folks didn't. Had people come in and out, but I'd say the last 2 years we had the same team in place, and they're incredible, and they're really kicking butt. We've got great leadership with them, and I think it's going to work. And to Emily's point, it's not going to get fixed in 2 years. I'm okay waiting a few years, because I do believe that 90% of kids can learn to read, and 90% isn't our goal this year. In fact, they're lower than that. And I got questions from our board, like, Andy, it looks like you lowered your goal from last year. I'm like, well, we didn't meet our goal last year, and so I'm not going to set it sky high and then everybody's going to be bummed about it. Let's get the growth they're looking for. And our legislature and state has said, like, moving kids out of tier 3 into tier 2, from tier 2 to tier 1 is where we're going to reward you, and that's the right approach. So it takes time.
Over at Mosaics, I think there are a couple things when we think about change management and how this worked. One thing that was unique about our school opening in the pandemic is we ended up having an extended boot camp with our teachers, because our starting day got pushed back by 2 weeks due to a switch not being shipped from China as our school is being constructed. So we were really intentional about building up a culture of trust within our staff. And when teachers noticed right off the bat that this was not working, they trusted us to come and tell us, this isn't working. We're doing this. It's not happening. Our kids are struggling. We need to do something different. So I think one of the things that was nice was we had buy-in from the teachers. It was ground up in that regard. And we were smart enough to listen. We didn't, I've got a great director of learning. Her name's Debbie Foster. And she's a great advocate and a great person that our teachers just trust implicitly with what's going on. So having that member of my team is really integral to how we've done leadership and building that culture. And then it came to, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I said, here's the books. We don't have time to train on it. All of our PD time got sucked up into that delayed 2-week start. So here's a resource. Here's some videos you can watch. We just want you to try it and implement it. And we weren't expecting perfection. And I think that was really important, because sometimes when we get a new program, we say, here's what we want to do. We want to execute it, and you're going to do this 100% well. And we have this high expectation, and we need a high expectation. But we also need an on-ramp. And being clear on that this is an on-ramp is good. And we want you to try things, and then it allows for some creativity within teachers. Like, I've got a teacher here who has this great game show that she's implemented in with Foundations, and the kids love it. They absolutely adore it. And by saying, don't do it exactly how it is right here, try something out, we were able to improve a system. I think part of that change management was there. I think part of it is knowledge building as well. Debbie has been really intentional about teaching the science of reading to our teachers and a lot of our PD, and where does this fit. And then Debbie and I also actually mapped out a few years ago, when we realized Lucy wasn't going to work. We said, how do we pivot, and what can we keep to maintain our consistency, knowing that this is going to go away eventually, and what can we like, what are the good parts? Because like Emily said, Lucy Calkins isn't horrible. Like our first year when we implemented it with pretty good fidelity, all of our kids in that top 40% had excellent growth. We take the NWEA map. If you knew how to read, you challenged yourself and you got some excellent growth. The problem was if you didn't know how to read and you're in the bottom 50th percentile, you didn't grow hardly at all because there were no real decoding or explicit teaching strategies. So Debbie and I were doing a lot of work on the behind the scenes of understanding what is it we need to move to. And we actually were listening to her, Emily's podcast last year, and we're like, we got to do something. Like that lit a fire under us even more. Like we knew we needed to do it. And the question was like, do we pull the trigger on a new curriculum adoption this year or do we wait a year? And I had this, and I even told my staff this, I said, it's going to be really hard, but our kids deserve it. So we're going to do it. And we paired your work with Natalie Wexler's work on content-based knowledge. And we ended up really looking at 3 programs that were really about building content knowledge and using that background knowledge component to teach reading skills within embedded in the text as not like standalone. There's a whole bunch of like research and practices that we're trying to maximize with our literacy approach now, where it's much more comprehensive. Like last year we added integrity for phonemic awareness. It added and complemented our foundations approach. This year we added geodes, which is aligned as a decodable text with foundations, and then wit and wisdom, which is our new curriculum, aligns also with geodes. And so the decodable texts also build the content knowledge. So we've gotten much more aligned approach systematically, but it's taken us 4 years to get there. And even now, it still feels really heavy. And so some other things we have done, like this week, we have subs in classrooms to allow our teachers to sit down and plan with Debbie. How do we roll out wit and wisdom in an effective way? What are the arcs and how is this structured so we can do it better? So I think it's like when you think change management, back to your original question, it's like listening to your people, spacing it out over time. It was fast. Like I'm going to say it wasn't that we didn't do it with urgency. So I like that like admin hat, like, yeah, we want things done. We want things done now. But then how do we support the teachers in the implementation and give them space to do it with the ability to try something and not do it right?
Ashley, how much time do we have left? Because I had a thought, an idea that I wanted to see. We do have left. Okay. I don't want to put anybody on the spot out here, but I know we do have some superintendents, including the superintendent from the largest district, Superintendent Bub. I'd be really interested if anybody's willing to share a little bit from a district perspective, since we've got some people in the room, about what, and especially since your results apparently were quite good, what you've done to pivot in a similar way that these 2 gentlemen have described. And if you don't, I know you didn't prepare, and I just am putting you on the spot, so it's fine if you would rather not get up and just start talking off the top of your head. But I'd be really interested if you're willing to share anything, or any other superintendent who might be in the room. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I've actually spent last night preparing for this, so well played. Yeah, I mean, I think very similar to what I just heard up here from these 2 gentlemen. We really, obviously in West Ada, it's a little bit different in that we have 58 schools. And we count heavily on the administrators and the teachers that are in the trenches every single day working with our kids, but making sure that we get out of those thoughts. I love what Emily had said about the thoughts of what is so deeply entrenched, but probably not really accurate, is a really scary place to be. And working with our teachers to celebrate the good work that they're doing every single day and finding those highlights. I have this firm belief that every teacher wants to be successful. I haven't met the teacher yet that says, hey, listen, I really just want average scores. I want average kids, and I want average work performance. What we see with our teachers is, I want to be great. And so when you can really sell that and you can find those pockets of greatness and you can share that information through professional learning communities, through really solid leadership, that's what we've been focused on, is making sure that we find those pockets of greatness. And they're everywhere. They're in every single one of our schools. We know that. But how do we share that with the person next door who has those deeply embedded thoughts, those philosophies of what they've always done? And we've heard that so many times. And that's how we shift change. And it doesn't happen easy. And you know, in my world, and I appreciate some of the kudos for where we're at, we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go. And the day I'll sleep is when we're at that 100%. And so I don't get much sleep. I think I've aged 30 years in 3. So, but there's a long way to go. And I know that we have the people that are in the right places to do that work. And that's not speaking for West Ada. I think that's speaking statewide, from our legislature to our governor's office. I think it's a priority for everybody. But really finding those areas where we can get wins, and then celebrating that and getting people to catch on to that. That's how we get into this, and making sure that everything we do is based on solid research, not what our gut feels or what we think or how we learned how to read. I've never thought about how I learned how to read until you said it today, and I thought, well, I think my mom just gave me a book and said you need to read. And so it's a new challenge for us, but I think we have the people that are up for that challenge.
Thanks. I really appreciate your willingness to do that. One other thing I wanted to ask you two guys about was, Emily was talking about the comprehension part of the rope and of the formula. And I think a lot more focus, when this is done really superficially and people talk about the so-called science of reading, everybody sort of goes immediately to the phonics piece. But the comprehension piece is important. And I think, Anthony, early on you talked about, just dropping a chapter of Stuart Little without context into the middle. I mean, it's a great story, and building a love of reading, and which probably motivates comprehension, is a big part of this. So how have you approached that piece of the whole pivot in the approach to teaching reading?
So if you haven't read Natalie Wexler's book, The Knowledge Gap, it's a really good read, and she has this great argument that we need background knowledge to hang our hat on when we're trying to comprehend something. So being a STEAM school, one of the things that we want to do as a part of our charter is to really help our kids integrate learning in multiple ways. And when we were considering curricula, that was one of the things. We wanted something that was content-based to help facilitate our charter mission, which is, we want kids to be, for example, in kindergarten right now, our wit and wisdom unit is the 5 senses, and our science unit is the 5 senses. So kids are learning about this all day, and it's been really a good vehicle to help build that background knowledge. The different shift that we made this year, though, is because we have a curriculum that is really well developed with a focus on vocabulary and grammatical development and language structures and writing. Everything that we do is aligned in a purposeful way, and our kids are learning a much more systematic approach to vocabulary development. My kindergartner teachers came to me and said, we were doing this guided reading patch for the last couple of years, and we're still doing it in some ways for our intervention program. Like, we're still giving kids more like targeted skills, but what they need. But we didn't have a comprehensive vocabulary list we were having our kids learn, and now we do. So we've been much more intentional about that language comprehension approach this year than we have been in the past. And part of that was because we were trying to really solidify our decoding to start. So, and at the end of the day, when you look at those Scarborough's rope and the strands, you need to make sure you find something that allows teachers to implement all the parts of it in a way that is easier than trying to come up with pieces and parts of programs. Like, we tried to Frankenstein it, and it doesn't work that great. To say, but that doesn't mean, that's for like my core program. Intervention-wise, there are different approaches that help kids learn differently as well. So I think you have to have a solid core that has all of those pieces, and I think we're finally at a point where, I don't think we're going to get the results bump this year, but as we continue to progress and build these skills and build these structures, we're going to see that this is the vehicle that allows us to get to that 80-90% of students being proficient.
Andy?
We're still working on building that. As an international baccalaureate school, both of our schools are international baccalaureate schools, and in the kinder through 5th grade years, it's called the primary years program. It's organized around 6 units, or there's 6 units in each grade level, and they're the same 6 units, and they build on each other over the time that children are in school. So similar to what Anthony's talking about, let's just say, like, what does it mean to be a community is one of the units, or how do we organize ourselves? So, we take a interdisciplinary approach to that throughout kinder through fifth grade. So we weave those resources in a variety of things. So what I would say is we don't have a really great set of decodable readers or high strong content, and that's part of where we adopted some of the Journeys readers, because we need to integrate that into our classroom. So they're not entirely aligned, but they're better than what we had, because we know that kids need a lot of content. I felt lucky as a kid, and I know my children were lucky as kids, that we surrounded them with, and I was surrounded with books and content. My mom and dad were both really avid readers, and we read and were read to, and we read to our children, and they read a lot and still do. But not all kids get that, and that's where schools are just critical in America. Especially public schools are really critical in America, that they have those resources. So we're continuing to build that to make sure that our kids get that great content knowledge and build up strong classroom libraries at both campuses that reflect not only kids' interests, because we want them to read things they're interested in, but also those kinds of content, the kind of content that builds their skills and knowledge. Because both of our schools, like Anthony's is a STEAM school, ours is an international baccalaureate school, which is essentially STEAM as well, right? It's college preparatory in nature, and by the time kids get to the 11th and 12th grade, we're asking them to do really complex college level stuff by the time they enter their junior year. It's like taking, if you're familiar with advanced placement, the AP, it's like taking 6 AP courses 2 years in a row. Not 2 AP courses, but 6. And so it's, the writing tasks and the reading tasks are very taxing and doable if you're a strong reader. And so that's why we've sort of committed to that, as Kurt Liebeck, the president of the state board, said last year, the ISBA, is to all of us superintendents or charter administrators, like, if you just make K-3 your number one priority, we're going to solve a lot of problems downstream. And I really appreciated that he said that. I know that he means it. I've known him a long time, and I share that. So we're working on the content piece, getting those right kinds of readers, decodable and otherwise, across the school. I think we've done a great job this year of moving that forward, but we've got more work to do to make sure they get the content.
Okay, thanks. Last question I'm going to ask you guys, and then I wanted to make sure we have a little time for the audience questions as well. And that is, you've got a fair number of policymakers in the room, various levels. What advice for or request of policymakers might you have, sitting where you sit?
Sure. I don't know. I'm speaking off the cuff, and I sure hope I probably will say something I probably shouldn't say. I think big picture, one of the things that teachers really need, ask for, demand all the time is time to work together. When we look at our school year, it's just not designed to do that, right? Most schedules, when you really start getting down to, it's got to be 990 hours of instruction, X, Y, and Z. That can, especially when you start talking about teacher contracts and length of the school year and when you can do things together, it becomes just an infinitesimal amount of time, especially with all the other things schools have to do and do. And I'm not trying to say do. I'm not trying to be funny. But I just realized that. If there's a way to look at creating more space in our school schedules, we recognize it as local control, right? We set our own calendars, but we are constrained by a whole variety of things that are not local control at all. And, increasing the length of our school year to add in more days for teacher professional development costs a lot of money. A lot of money that schools do not have. So I'm not just sitting here saying, like, throw more money at us, we love money, money will fix all the problems. It won't. What will fix problems are people working together to get it done, but that takes money. So if there's a way for us to look at that, think about that over the longer term, and there's a whole bunch of things that roll into that. I think the space to work together as professionals and leaders and teachers and parents would be hugely helpful. And we're lucky at my school that we actually built a school around a schedule like that. but I'm greedy, and I would love more time for our teachers to do that. And I'd love more money to pay them to do all the cool things that I'd love for them to do over the summer. So that'd be my pitch, I think. Time to work together towards a common goal.
I think there are different facets. I think Andy hits one where, money doesn't solve problems, but it does help us when we think about how do we pay our teachers for extra contract training, or how do we get curricular resources that allow us to, not have to borrow West Ada, which we appreciate, like the collaboration and the generosity, right? Right. But when we look at the funding of the state, we have increased it significantly in the last 10 years, which we are so thankful for. And then don't take it as we aren't, but we're still funded around the 50th in the nation. And so when it comes to some resource allocation, as leaders, we all in all of our districts and our charters, we have to decide what is the piece of pie that we're going to do and what's our priority and how do we align our funds to do that. I think when it comes to once again, kind of that resource allocation as well, there are so many different funding streams and different strings attached to every funding stream that sometimes we get constrained on what we can spend our money on. So we may have some money setting aside in one technology, and we want to buy curriculum, but we can't do that. So I think some flexibility within that to allow our local leaders to be able to say, here's a resource, here's a stream of funding, let's free up the strings and allow us to empower us to make those decisions. I think that would be really, really helpful when it comes to resources. The second thing I think that we saw that was really successful in the state of Idaho was the math thinking initiative. And we need to do something probably similar to that in reading. Every teacher got pretty good quality professional development on what developmental mathematical thinking was. The state paid for the credits. The state paid sometimes for the teacher to attend it. It was on the teacher time, but it was one of those requirements for recertification. And what we saw is a lot of teachers learned how to think about math differently to implement the Common Core, and I think that was really, really helpful. I think if you say you're required to go watch 3 50-minute videos and check a box to get your recertification, I don't know that's going to move the needle because it's not high quality. We need to be able to interact, to discuss, and I think that statewide push, if we're really going to push this, that does come from the State Department. And once again, it goes back to funding it, making sure it's high quality, and something that teachers can take away and then put into a classroom. And then even supporting your administrators in that, like how do we help collaborate and sustain this initiative that our state's trying to achieve.
Thanks. That concludes my questions, but I wanted to make sure we left some time for questions from the audience if there are any. I hope there are.
Thank you. Thank you guys for your time, and sounds like you're great school leaders. I was a teacher for a long time here in Idaho and also in California, and I spent some time at the State Department as the Literacy Assessment Coordinator. And my question for you is, as a teacher, in Idaho specifically, there's a lot of pressure on evaluations. So how do you, as school leaders, support your teachers to understand science of reading and effective instructional strategies, while also being supportive in understanding that not all students learn at the same rate, and that each student gets to where they need to be in their own time, and not reflect that poorly or negatively in their evaluation, especially since it's tied to legislation and pay and contract?
That's an excellent question. I'm not directly evaluating teachers now, but I can tell you just looking at what happens in my own schools, we're not a penalty-heavy school, right? We set goals together and we work together, and I can't name I wouldn't do it out loud anyway, but I can't name a single teacher that I've gone down or one of my school leaders has gone down and dinged them because they're not moving fast enough Well, gosh darn it, we know that 90% can read. Why aren't you there? It's October 12th, 13th. We just don't do that. So one of the things I touched on, and this is, again, state initiative, we got involved with it. I didn't tell all of my teachers they had to join the reading initiative, Smart Reading Initiative. But I certainly talked a lot about it, and I'm super pleased that all of them are doing it. And that's, we're not a huge district, but that's quite a few teachers, K through 3. They're all getting that professional development, and in many cases, actually in all the cases, my school leaders who are directly involved with reading are also involved in that project. The other thing we've done is, again, working within the Bloom network, we're lucky enough to have some support that's frankly open to all schools in Idaho, not just charter schools. And so we have worked a lot on talking about what does it mean to really be leaders in the classroom, because we all know, and people have been principals in here, know that often days your days can just be eaten up with stuff like kid X brought knife to school, kid Y threw a roll of toilet paper out of the bus window on the way to school. It's all this stuff that just distracts you from what you really need to do, but those are real things that really happen and things come up. But one of the things we've been really working on over the last 2 years, and it's been hammered into us when we all sit together and when we talk together, is school leaders need to be in classrooms looking for very specific things. And those very specific things, frankly, are not on the Danielson rubrics. Right? The Danielson rubrics were always intended to grow teachers and help coach them along. They weren't really meant to be an evaluation tool, but it's one that we use because we got to pick something, right? And it's consistent across it. But what really works with that is to really sit as a leadership team and a teaching team to sit down and say, what are the things in the Danielson rubric that can tie to specific high leverage teacher moves and leadership moves that we do know move the needle? And so that's what we've been doing at our school, because we've been getting that sort of coaching from good folks that Bloom has hired and brought in, and then we've had public school districts involved in that with us as well, traditional public school districts involved with it as well. That has been, for me, instrumental. It's huge. The other thing is, I'm having regular one-on-ones with my leadership team, and we are not talking about the buses. We are not talking about the quality of the asphalt in the parking lot. We are not talking about that. The only thing we talk about how we're doing for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we stand up and we go to classrooms. And then we talk about what we saw, what was going well, what was going poorly, and we make sure the teacher gets those notes. And oftentimes, I'm really pleased to say, because we've been really clear about what we're looking for, I'm way off track now. What I'm saying is we're not dinging teachers because we're learning too, right? If anybody gets dinged for poor reading, it better be me, right? Because the buck stops with the superintendent. We shouldn't be crushing teachers because they don't have the right tools. They're not ready yet. We got to get them ready, and they got to be ready, and they got to be motivated. That's one thing I will ding them on. If you don't care, or you're not motivated, or it doesn't seem interesting to you, that's a problem. That you don't know it right now, that's not a problem. So that would be my answer. I'm sounding pretty passionate now. I apologize, but that's just where we're going. The other thing that is really important to me, 2 things. It's a personal pet peeve. I never call school a building. I never call school leaders admins, right? Because language matters. That's what we're talking about here. And the way that we treat each other with our language matters. And so if you call it a building, and I'm not dinging people because I know a lot of us do, that's just the lingo of schools, but it takes away from the purpose of what it actually is. It's a school, right? And then teachers are teachers, leaders are leaders, and we're all trying to do the right thing. So I'm wound up now, sorry. Anyway, I really appreciate you guys coming and listening. I don't know if I added to anything here or not.
Over at Mosaics, the evaluation process is very collaborative with the teachers. One of the things that we look at when we think about evaluation data, because we have to report out on it, is we look at both growth and proficiency. So, when we write up our IRI things, it's 75% of students either grew a tier or scored proficient, right? So you can combine both. The other things we do is we also look at multiple measures. So it could be that maybe your IRI didn't hit the proficiency mark and maybe your growth wasn't quite there as measured on the IRI. But we also utilize other assessments like the MAP assessment. And that's also a very good tool for us to measure how our kids are learning. And even though we are prescribed to include IRI for our K-3 teachers, there is definitely flexibility within it as a leader that we say, you know what, we're not dinging you. Like, you're doing your best. We know what you're doing. And we're going to work with you on being a reflective practitioner. So some things that we've done, like, once again, I'm in the same boat as Andy. I think leaders need to be in the classroom. So it can't be like a one and done, because that's not really necessarily fair to our teachers. You know, you're teaching kids 165, 180 days, depending on your calendar. And you have an administrator come in for 30 minutes once and then 30 minutes twice, and you get a grade based on that. I don't think that's a fair shake. So like this year, my director of learning and I, we actually I've been in about 11 teachers' classrooms weekly this year, and then we're switching our coaching schedule, and we're getting feedback based on some school-based goals. And it's not a one and done, it's a continuous cycle of improvement. So if you look at evaluation as that, it takes away the scariness, and it's a collaborative process. And that's like a mindset change that has to happen at the leadership level. When we are talking about what's good for kids and how do we get there and what instructional moves can we make, it is so freeing in so many ways compared to, I came in here and I saw that you were a 2 on the Danielson when it came to your transition time. If we say, you know, one of our school goals is establishing good systems and routines, I noticed your thing was 2 minutes. What is the step we can take to get that to 30 seconds? So I think a lot of it has to do with who your leader is and what they're looking at, but I also think it has to be a continuous cycle of observation and feedback that allows you to then come together and say, well, how do we think we did this year? Here's our measurement tool. You rate yourself, I'll rate you, and let's have a conversation.
All right, we have 3 minutes left. Can we do the next one quickly?
Hi, I am a former middle school special education teacher turned teacher ed instructor and disability professional at the university. I know from teaching at the middle school, when students needed reading instruction, if they weren't receiving special education services, they really weren't getting tier 2, tier 3 instruction in reading. So it left a lot of students receiving general education instruction out, and they were struggling. And I know that when my school tried to move to a model of providing more small group tier 2 instruction to our students receiving general education services or instruction, it was, oh, you know, like I don't know how to teach those fundamental skills because I'm not certified in that. And they're right. I was one of 3 teachers in a building of 25 who actually had the certification and the training to be able to teach some of those prerequisite skills. So my question can be for you two. I know Mosaic only goes up to 8th grade or is going to go up to 8th. I know Sage goes to 12. There could be some other leaders in the room. But what I really want to know is what are like 2 specific examples of how your school or your school district is providing more structured tier 2, possibly tier 3 intervention in reading to those middle and high school students for teachers that don't have the certification necessarily, but need support?
I'll keep it as short as I can. So this year what we did is we have a 7-period rotational block for middle school. And one of those block periods is projects where we want kids to like integrate the STEAM practices. And like our first project was First Lego League for our students. Next project is going to be Future Cities. The students who are not excelling, we also have an intervention block going on at the same time, taught by our ELA teacher. So we identify those kids. We use the MAP assessment as one metric, and we use their ability and teacher observations as the other. The teacher comes up with those lists of kids, and we just had this meeting yesterday where we split those kids out, and they're assigned for the quarter an intervention block. The idea is we give the kids the opportunity to come back into our projects, but we want to make sure they have dedicated time to get some of those skills remediated and secured.
We do something similar. And again, it's not 100%, it's not perfect. And Ashley says, I got 1 minute, so go fast. Similar sort of stuff, we using essentially the measures of academic progress, the MAP tool, the MAP assessment, which gives pretty granular data on where each kid is and where you are as a class in a school. We use that to kind of sort out who needs extra in the middle school. And then again, we don't have the resources to provide an intervention teacher, but we do organize around our advisory program. We have an intervention block in there where we frankly use some computer-based adaptive reading programs to help kids midstream, which is middle school, improve their understanding of how English works. So it's a big problem. Emily touched on it. That's we've got a huge bubble of kids out there that did not get good foundational instruction that, you know, we're all going to do our best to catch up, but you know, the sad truth of that is we're probably not going to catch all those kids up, which is a real bummer because they're going to go into life weak readers and frankly have a less rich life probably.
All right, you guys are great. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for the honesty and the integrity of what you do. And again, thanks for the great comments and questions from the audience. I now have the privilege and honor of introducing Superintendent Debbie Critchfield. Debbie, I don't think I need to read who you are. I mean, but thank you for being here. Thank you for the great work you're doing and appreciate everything you've done as a school board member, as a state board member, and now as state superintendent. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Very much. Thank you. Thank you, Terry, and for the invitation to be here and to share some time with you. As I look across the audience and had little text messages as we were going through, I know I'm amongst friends and experts and partners and warriors in the cause for reading. And Emily said a lot of important things in her presentation. And one of the things that caught my attention was this isn't easy. And so we know there's not an easy button, but the good news is we're all at the table at the same time. And there's a momentum in our state to make significant progress. And that is very exciting to me and satisfying. About a year ago, I was at a conference and I had the opportunity to be first exposed to Emily and her message. And probably like you, for those that this is the first time that they've heard anything, he's with me, by the way. And so not awkward at all. Anyway, in my mind, I started thinking, what's happening in Idaho? What are we doing with this? What does this look like? Because we all translated into what's happening, not only in our state, but as my teacher, with my kid, in my school, in my community, do they know this information? That's the important thing. We can sit here and share and talk, but how does the water get to the end of the road, to use a farming analogy? I love our state for a number of reasons. And one of the, I think, most important characteristics that makes Idaho positioned in a way that we should and can be a leader in this is that we don't have as many layers of bureaucracy. And some of you may be frustrated by what we do have, but trust me, when we look nationally, and I think that Emily would share that in other states, it can be more challenging to take the information that we have, what we know now, and actually get that to the classroom. We've got incredible partners, from our teachers union to our school boards association to our superintendents association and to other partners, Decoding Dyslexia Idaho. There are so many people that are playing and leading in this area that I know that this is the right time and we've got what it takes to make some continued progress. Okay, so where are we now? What are we doing? What are the pieces that we have in place? Something that many of you may know of, but not as many as should. There is a Literacy Achievement and Accountability Act that was put into statute in 2021. For those that are nerdy and like some of these references, it's in Title 33, Chapter 18. And we need to operationalize that. There's good stuff in there. And it references the science of reading, and it references that interventions need to be founded in that. And so we've taken the expert information, and because it's been updated, we're able to point to good practices and effective strategies. What we're lacking here, the missing dot, is sharing that and leading out on what we already know. Funding, the governor mentioned this in his remarks this morning. In the last 5 years, we've increased funding to literacy fivefold. We're now at $72.8 million. The investments are there. What are the missing pieces? When we talk about solutions and leading out for solutions, we've got investments, we've got good information. Let's combine those things now. And let's have informed decision making at our school board level when we come to the time where we're choosing curriculum. Curriculum is expensive. It's one of the most expensive items, and the adoption process takes a long time. I can appreciate, as someone that was a locally elected school board member, that when you've invested a significant amount of money and you've gone to your local community and asked them to supplement because the state doesn't provide that as a line item, and then perhaps you realize it's not getting you where you want it to be, you may go with it because this is what we've got. And we're not in a position financially or perhaps with expertise at the local level to make some of those significant changes. One of the things that we're doing at the State Department of Education is going through the curriculum. It's going to take a minute to go through the curriculum that is posted on our website, because local leaders look to that and say, we're going through an adoption process. What does the state tell us? Well, the state in the past has listed a long list with no explanation as to, we believe these are the most effective ones. Now, Emily has shared, and I fully believe that it isn't about a book. Oh, I wish there was a silver bullet of a book. Just buy this curriculum and you got it made. Curriculum is important, but there's other things attached to that. But we can start with a place of rating and vetting curriculums that come to the state, vendors that come and say, hey, here's the book that we think is going to solve all of your problems. Well, it might or might not, but let's put something in process that helps our local leaders make the most effective and informed decisions that they can make. So speaking of local control, we honor that and we support that. But I have also found that our local leaders are looking for some guidance, some recommendations. How do we do this well? As Dr. Bub, I think he's not here now, but anyway, he was over here. As he mentioned, he doesn't know of any teacher that shows up saying that, they want to be adequate. I'm not aware of any board member that's not interested in doing a good job for kids in their communities. They got elected because they believe in their communities and in their local schools. And so at the department level, we can assist that not only with curricular choices, but with also pointing towards effective professional development, what good interventions are working. So when we talk about what are the good things and the good tools that are out there, how do we do that? Emily pointed out that it isn't just one thing, that districts and schools can be successful using a variety of tools that there are commonalities, but they may be different curriculum, there may be different protocols involved. At our level, we can do some matchmaking. We can look at districts who are struggling and look at districts who are successful and then find districts that look like each other. I'm not going to put a West Ada or a Boise school district with one of our schools in Leadore. They don't look alike. And so how do we then, at our level with the experts and the people that we have at the department that are willing and want to serve, find those effective strategies, pair people up and say, here's who you can learn from, and here are ways that they were able to be successful. The other thing that we talk quite a bit about, and I think is equal to anything that we do in the classroom, is the preparation part. And we spend a significant amount of time, and many of the questions focused and centered on what our teacher prep programs look like. This has been something that has been a conversation for Dr. Clark, who's the president of the Board of Education, and myself. Before I was in this role as a board member previously, these are conversations that we're having. Now, one thing I can tell you, because again, we want to know what's happening in our universities. We know that they are teaching teachers on the elements of the science of reading, but we also know that there is work to do. We talk to teachers that are new in the classroom. We talk to administrators that hire brand new teachers, and we see some disconnects still. We wish the teacher knew this. And we know that there's money and time that's been invested in our brand new teachers that have just come out of their own investments of time and energy and resources to supplement areas that they need help in. And I hear from teachers going into the classroom, coming out of student teaching, who say, I wish that I would have known that, or I wish this and I wish that. Well, we want to not make that a wish list. We want to make that a to-do list, that we're able to have some consistency across the state in all of our programs. Okay, so where are we going to go from here? We have a wonderful day where we get excited, and like you, when I first heard Emily, I had that fire, that passion of, we're gonna go door to door, every kid's going to read. We're going to make that happen by Saturday. That's how I felt. And thankfully, I have people around me who reset expectations that I have for myself. So I want to share with you a few things that we're working on right now that we believe will help drive to the outcomes that we want. We are going through a process of standards review and looking at essential standards so that teachers don't become independent contractors in their classroom when they can't get to all of the standards and say, well, these are the ones I'm going to teach in my class, and then we hope those are the effective ones, the essential ones. And so we're going to go through a process with that, working with our friends at the Board of Education. And then again, I mentioned the work around curriculum. We're also looking at providing some high-quality, research-based professional development. We've heard a lot about SMART training. I would love to be able to get that to everybody everywhere, even for students that don't show characteristics of needing that type of intensive help. We were able to tap into expiring federal funds that were available through the Board of Education and the Governor's Office to provide interventions for schools that needed extra help at no cost to them. And with that, we're also providing and trying to wrap around coaching. Again, we've started small because of funds, and we'd hope to scale that out and add to that as we come along. We're talking to our college deans about making sure that the connections and alignments of what's actually happening in the classroom and the known effective strategies are what are being taught. And then again, I shared how we're connecting effective strategies and districts with everyone. I would like to say that as we look at the numbers and we celebrate and acknowledge the significant amount of work that has happened in the literacy area, and as we look at the IRI, we're so happy to see that green grow. There's there above, and we want that to grow. But I'm focusing on that red. And Emily and I talked about that last night. We had an opportunity to spend some time together and discuss some of this. That below basic, that's the number when you look at the trends that has been fairly flat. That's where we want to shrink. We want to get them into the yellow and get all those people into the green. And we do that through all of the things that we've said. So we've had all of these things in place, and I like to take all of the information and come up with some conclusions as to why, if our state is positioned well with just how we operate and do business, and if we know that the strategies are good and we believe that there's good things happening in the teacher prep realm and we're trying to support our local boards, how is it that we're not getting to some of those benchmarks that we would like to set for ourselves? And Andy stole a little bit of my conclusion. We haven't had the leadership there to do that. You have to have that nexus. We've had all of these cogs in a machine, and you have to have a way to bring all of those things together. And I'm hoping as someone that's almost 10 months on the job, that I can lead out for that in those ways, and that we can make those connections, and that we can continue to accentuate the partnerships, and that we can bring new people to the table, and that we bring our parents to the table, and that that doesn't feel adversarial, but it feels like we're all on the same team. And so for me, sitting here today, I continue to write a bunch of notes and to learn, because I want to grow in this area as well. But I know, and I'm going to come back to this, that Idaho can and should be a national leader when it comes to anything academic that's good for kids. And I'm asking you to go back and be leaders in your areas of influence, and we're going to be looking to all of you to work together. We're going to kind of lock arms, and we're going to use the strength that we have in our state to move forward. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here and to learn with you, and I'm excited for where we're going to go from here. So thank you. Thank you, Terry.
So we are right about on time. I have to say thank you, Ashley, for setting this up, and for moving everything along and keeping those of us who struggle to keep up in time on time. So thank you for that. Thanks to all of you for being here and for the great work you're doing with our students. I also have to thank my friend from Excel and Ed, because literally it was Excel and Ed where we got to meet Emily. And thank you to you for coming here. We know how busy you are and that you've been so gracious with your time. We appreciate that. And I think with that, thanks to all of you, and all the best. Have a great weekend.